Ladies and gentlemen, recorded in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. It's time for Fight Night Picks with your hosts, Frank and Matt Allen.
And it is great to be back in 2021 talking about the sport that we all love and enjoy. At Craig Allen FNP. You can find me there on Twitter and Instagram at Matt Allen FNP on those respective social media channels. And Matt, we're getting ready for UFC Fight Night, Chiesa versus Magny, coming at us early on Wednesday morning here in North America. Really looking forward to this one. There's a lot of under-the-radar fights, a lot of different storylines, but of course, we have that headlining bout at welterweight between a couple of guys that have had really long and extensive UFC careers. I mean, Michael Chiesa coming up on The Ultimate Fighter, winning the season, had some success at lightweight, and he's had plenty of success up at 170 pounds. And for Neil Magny, in his last fight, picking up one of the biggest wins of his career over the former champion and Robbie Lawler, making him look like maybe an actual man and less a fighter in that one, really.
Yeah, it was a weird fight, and here's the good news for Neil Magny. When you beat a guy like Robbie Lawler, good things are going to happen to you, and luckily they did reward him with a main event. And same thing for Michael Chiesa. You look at who he beat in his last fight, Rafael dos Anjos. When you beat guys like Robbie Lawler and Rafael dos Anjos, it just really sets you up for bigger and better things next in your career. Really nice to see these two guys getting matched up when the original headliner did fall through.
But I mean, overall, we have a look at this card, all sorts of great fights, and as we always do, Matt, with Fight Night Picks, we're going to have a look and switch it on over to our Fight of the Night screen. When we talk Fight of the Night, when we had a look at our last card, the Saturday card, I mean, it was hard not to go with your main event, Max Holloway, Calvin Kattar, and Carlos Condit and Matt Brown. And listen, we're taping this ahead of the event, so we could be totally wrong with those picks, and that's all right. That's the whole point of the Fight of the Night screen. We're just having some fun here. But a lot of the times with Fight Night Picks, we'll go for some of those hipster picks. And as you can see on the screen, our first pick for Fight of the Night, we have Beast Boy Mike Davis taking on the Dragon Mason Jones. And Matt, Wales Mason Jones on an absolute heater, 10-0 so far throughout his young career. Cage Warriors double champ at 155 and 170 pounds. And it's kind of funny because if you look at the weigh-in results from those two fights, he weighed in under the lightweight limit and under the welterweight limit, something you don't see very often. But overall, this definitely has the potential to become a Fight of the Night because both of these guys, when they get into the pocket, they will engage with fire and fury.
Oh, 100%. Mason Jones just really has phenomenal stand-up. No matter what range the fight is at, he can be at long range with his kicks, really good at boxing up close. But the thing is, Mike Davis has ungodly power at 155. And we were talking before, Mike Davis went from fighting Gilbert Burns to Thomas Gifford. Like, you don't really know where Mike Davis's skill set is right now because, okay, he lost to a guy who many people believe is the best 170-pounder in the world, and he beat Thomas Gifford. So, a lot of question marks, really surrounding both guys, especially with Jones making his UFC debut. Really exciting fight. Could not be looking more for
And I mean, it is a crazy one for Mike Davis. He was one of those fighters that I had penciled in for 2020. Unfortunate that we didn't get to see him compete. He had a couple of bouts, reshuffled, and out of a couple of them. So finally we get to see him in here in 2021. And kind of similar to Tom Breeze when he took on Umar on the Saturday card, where he went from fighting KB Buller, the regional Canadian fighter, all the way up to a ranked fighter in Umar Akhmedov. Mike Davis going from Gilbert Burns on short notice to a guy in Thomas Gifford that just had the lone fight in the UFC. For Mason Jones, I mean, really, it's been a Cage Warriors explosion here of late. We've seen a lot of fighters really gain some big opportunities and big spotlights, especially in our UFC 257 main event with Conor McGregor taking on Dustin Poirier. But this is just another example of one of those young fighters coming out of Wales, a guy similar to a Brett Johns, similar to, a lot of the talent that we have seen come out of Wales. Maybe not John Phillips, but some of the other fighters that we have seen, and especially with a young guy like this, Jack Shore as well. A lot of success and a lot of good things coming to Wales. So really looking forward to this fight. This is definitely a contender for Fight of the Night. Let's have a look at our other pick. And I mean, Matt, for our other pick of Fight of the Night, this is a fight that was originally scheduled to take place quite a while ago. We made an extensive prediction video for it. And then on the day before, Matt Schnell couldn't cut the last 2 pounds and reportedly collapsed. So the fight was rebooked. Tyson ended up with a short notice opponent in that one. And you look at the last 2 fights that he's had. Zarrukh Adashev on short notice. Jerome Rivera, another short notice one. maybe not up to snuff with some of the competition that he's faced in his extensive MMA career. I mean, you look at it so far, 20 wins, 11 losses, and 1 draw. I mean, originally supposed to take on Ryan Benoit. That gets scrapped. Matt Schnell gets scrapped for Jerome Rivera. Then Matt Schnell again in December. That one gets scrapped. So finally, these two guys get to fight. Tyson Nam spending time training in Hawaii. We've seen that on the Instagrams. For Matt Schnell, he's a training vagabond. It depends on what site you look on, but he could be training in Shreveport. He could be training over in Texas with Fortis. He could be training at AKA, ATT, AKA maybe not so much, but ATT. Matt Schnell, when he's at his best, can be a very, very good fighter. For Tyson Nam, he's a little less dynamic, but overall, stylistically, these guys make for a very good matchup.
Exactly, and both guys' strengths play into the other guy's weaknesses. Because for Schnell, absolute monster on the ground, really good with submissions, head and arm chokes and whatnot, but his chin has been a little suspect, especially in his UFC run. And for a guy like Tyson Nam, his kickboxing is phenomenal. His pure Muay Thai is some of the better in the sport. And the fact that, well, really, Tyson Nam reminds me of a Giga Chikadze, where lately he hasn't been fighting the top level of competition, but I really think it matters how you beat guys, not always just who you beat. And for Tyson Nam, 2 knockouts in a combined under a minute, as impressive as you can possibly get. And with Schnell, the shortcoming of his career has been sometimes he gets tagged. So Tyson Nam could go out there and get an absolute highlight reel KO, or we could see just another patented Matt Schnell submission in this one.
Really looking forward to this one. Of course, Tyson Nam in his last time out, that one at bantamweight on short notice against Jerome Rivera. Same with the fight against Zarrukh Adashev, but typically known as a flyweight. His first 2 fights in the UFC against Sergey Perez and Kai France obviously didn't go his way. For Matt Schnell, last one at flyweight, but had a tough cut the last time out. So we'll have to see what happens in this one, but it should be a really good fight. Looking forward to Nam and Schnell and the possibility of Mason Jones and Mike Davis as being a fight of the night style contender. With those picks of fight of the night, it's a great card. Really looking forward to this one. I mean, with the card that we had before this, it was loaded with a lot of very big names. Holloway Cater at the start. Again, maybe you're watching this from Wednesday to Saturday. Who knows what those picks are going to be? Maybe you're watching it from Saturday to Wednesday and we're either geniuses, clairvoyants, or absolute donkeys. Who knows? But overall, looking towards a really big year with Fight Night picks last year. Unfortunate for Matt, the 2020 and the 2019 prediction champion, myself, I had a strong start to last year, teetered off a little bit at the end, but picked it back up with the last card of the year. Of course, Matt ended on a strong note, but overall, we're really looking forward to this. And Matt, we have UFC 257 coming up too.
Really, this week is insane. We're getting 3 fight cards in 1 week. Again, depending on when you watch this, some of them might have already happened. But no, really good first week to kick off the UFC season, if you will, for 2021. And yeah, let's make 2021 the best year ever.
So make sure you check out Fight Night Picks Kicks. That one coming up before the events. This is going to be a special edition of Kicks. So for Saturday's card with Cater and Holloway, that one will be taking place on Saturday morning. It's an early one. We have a 12 Eastern start over here on the East Coast, so we'll be live a couple hours before that at 10 o'clock Eastern on the Saturday. For the Wednesday card with Magny and Chiesa, we'll be doing it Tuesday night. A little bit easier for everybody involved. You'll at least have the chance to see the fighters weigh in, and we'll be able to throw some input in there as far as our final picks and predictions, the ones that actually get tabbed up. And then, of course, for UFC 257, business as usual. It's a later card here on the East Coast, but we're really looking forward to that. We have a retooled website, fightnightpicks.com. We are in the 2000s now, so no longer .net. We're always at .com. You can check out picks, predictions, previews, the podcast. You can find the Fight Night Picks store over there. All sorts of great stuff. Fightnightpicks.com with Josh Hart on the books. And then again, make sure you check out Early Stoppage and all the podcasts here on YouTube. But like Matt said, we're really looking forward to a busy 2021. We've got a great card coming up, so let's start talking about it, Matt. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say, let's get into it. Really looking forward to this bantamweight contest that's been scheduled a few different times between Umar Nurmagomedov and Sergey Morozov coming in from Kazakhstan. And Matt, for M1 Global's former champ Sergey Morozov, you just watch a couple of fights and you get hooked. This guy has one of the more entertaining styles that you're going to see. And one of the things with Fight Night Picks and with myself, I know we've had a boxer in our logo for the longest time, and a lot of people ask, well, some people ask, do you guys ever cover boxing? Not a lot. However, I've been watching a lot of boxing. And I have to say that I'm going to borrow a term from boxing to use for Sergey Morozov. Because if you do go back and watch a lot of those fights, he's more of a puncher and less of a boxer. He's the type of guy that he'll use a little bit of his jab, but it's a lot of his power punching, not a lot of his footwork. He can throw absolute cinder blocks for some of these lower weight classes. If you go back, I mean, he's on an absolute heater with a 5-fight win streak coming into this one. You look at the last 2 for the titles against Alexander Osetrov and Josh Reddinghouse, rematch that they had in his last fight over a year ago. And the guy will put his opponents either out or he will rock them very, very badly, especially in that last fight against Reddinghouse. And opposite him, I mean, everybody by now knows the Nurmagomedov name. And for Umar Nurmagomedov, this is a guy that's really been on the radar for a number of years now. I know when we started Fight Night Picks a couple of years ago, he was one of those prospects that I had that you needed to watch back in 2018, kind of following from 17-18 with Fight Nights Global. Then he eventually came over to the PFL, had some more fights overseas, came back with the PFL, and then in his last time out, a really big win over Argentina's Brian Gonzalez, where he finished him in that one, rear naked choke, absolutely pounded away. Man, I'm really excited about these two guys because while I don't know if you can still consider Sergey Morozov a prospect with as many fights as he has had, Umar Nurmagomedov has come so far in the last couple of years. I went through his last 5 fights, watched them, detailed them round by round. I don't know if I've done so much tape study for just one fight, but this one really piqued my interest because, again, a guy that I've kind of followed for a long time, not even from afar, really focused in on his career. Sergey Morozov, when I was really starting to get into M1 Global at the same time, was really making moves and starting grooves. Overall, what's your take on this fight? Because I think it's a very, very good one.
So this should be a really interesting fight because of the scrambling ability of Morozov. It's not really something you get to see all that often, but he has really reactive hips, and that's something you don't really see from sort of regional level fighters. It's something that you see once people are in the UFC and they're in that kind of top 10, top 15 category, because it's something that you develop later on in your career, where the second people go take you down, just your hips are either away or you're pushing people down. Morozov has that skill, and it's something you don't really see often for guys coming into the UFC. And he's going to have to use that against a guy like Umar Nurmagomedov, where Nurmagomedov's very interesting because he's not like a Khabib where he's just trying to push you up against the cage and then the rest of his game can kind of start getting put together. For Umar Nurmagomedov, he'll really just go for volume takedowns no matter where you are in the cage, and that's the really interesting thing that's more specific to him than it is some of the other Nurmagomedovs. He won't just get the fight up against the cage and then shoot for takedowns from that position. Now, yes, his better takedowns come from there, and he can really weigh on his opponent by doing so, but he's also great at just going for open cage takedowns.
And that was one of those things, especially in those notes. So you go back through the last 5 fights, and his fifth to last fight was over with the PFL, and he took on a really good prospect. You have to make sure that you pencil this guy down somewhere or leave it in your memory bank. And it's a difficult name to pronounce for us in North America. But he took on Syed Yokub Kakramanov, and if you watch that fight, it was a good fight overall. But at that time, you could see Umar Nurmagomedov at the time was pushing Syed Yokub up against the cage, and he just kept kind of pushing him. Wasn't really working the takedown a whole lot, but you could tell that he was such a polished striker that he could really get things done on the feet. He throws out a great push kick with his lead leg, and it goes high, and it's quick. He throws a ton of question mark kicks, and out of these last 5 fights, it's just about every fight, he throws 5 or 6 of them. If you don't believe me, it's absolutely insane to watch. He has great pressure with his hips. He can really kind of counter everything that's brought at him. And Matt, honestly, the only thing that I saw in all of those fights, the only one weakness, was when he goes to throw that push kick, and a couple of announcers brought it up, I believe it was at the PFL, the fact that when he does that, he can get countered. And in that fight against Syed Yokub Kakramanov, he did get caught and cracked. He kind of popped down to the mat and popped right back up to his feet, got pushed up, continued on in that fight. That was the only time I saw him dropped. I even saw him remotely hurt. But if you look at the other fights, the fight against Wagner Lima for the title, that one was Battle on Volga 10, kind of a GFC partnership. Wagner Lima stood no chance in that one. That guy was kind of brought in to fail. You see that especially with some of these Russian promotions where they bring in Brazilians.
Unfortunately, it is something you will see looking through both guys' records where they'll have fights that they were kind of put into to win in the first place. And it is always hard to get a judgment for where a guy's skill set is when you do see a lot of opponents like that in their past. But for Morozov, not to steal your thunder, but I am worried about what you would say. Nurmagomedov will be somewhat stationary after he throws, and we see this again from some fighters. For Morozov, he can kind of get one of those Aaron Pico-esque knockouts if he is timing the kicks of Nurmagomedov, where how Amanda Nunes kind of did the reverse when she fought Holly Holm. Amanda Nunes was constantly waiting for Holly Holm to do that oblique kick, and then she was going to time her own head kick off it. If you're facing a kicker and he is starting to get lazy with his kicks, Morozov, and especially with the ungodly power that he possesses, could crack Nurmagomedov with any shot coming over the top when Nurmagomedov decides to go for kicks.
I mean, Sergey Morozov coming into this one, he's a master of sport and mixed martial arts. And again, he's very good counter striker, hits with a ton of power. That Reddinghouse rematch is really good opportunity. Now again, M1 Global 102, it was held in Kazakhstan. You got a fighter who's from Kazakhstan. You know how it's going to work, but in that fight, it was highly competitive. And if you look at rounds 4 and 5, Morozov started to kind of go a little bit over. The power bar was starting to drain. Reddinghouse really got into some really good positions, especially with the wrestling, the scrambles. He had Morozov's back a couple of times for rear naked opportunities, and he had one that was almost totally sunk in, but Morozov able to get out of it. But to move back over to Nurmagomedov, you look at that fight against Wagner Lima, it is what it is. He wins a decision. It wasn't one of the better fights you've seen of his career. You didn't see a huge progression. You go and look at the fight against Taras Grishkiv over with GFC. That was another one where Grishkiv 16-7 is the record, but if you have a look at it, it's full of salt.
It's nice salt.
It's table salt. But you look at it, Grishkiv goes hard overhand right, runs in, tries to take Nurmagomedov down, and gets brought down to the mat and submitted in that one. You go to his next PFL fight against Sidmar Onorio, a guy who had a loss to not just Aljamain Sterling, but Jimmy Rivera. He was nearing 40 years of age in that fight. He pulled guard in the first minute.
It made no sense.
And it was all Nurmagomedov. And Nurmagomedov was fine to play with him on the mat. So you at least know that he's confident in his ground game, and you know how confident he is in the striking. And then in his last fight, just over a year ago, again, against Argentina's Brian Gonzalez, and that one wasn't really close whatsoever. So we have seen a big progression from that, fit the last fight with the PFL all the way to his last fight. Now, it's been unfortunate, like I said, the fact that Umar Nurmagomedov has been booked for many fights. In 2020, he was booked for 3 different ones. Fight early on in the year against Hunter Azure. The card fell out, obviously, due to COVID. But the last 2 against Nathaniel Wood, where Nurmagomedov withdrew, and then Morozov back in October. That fight was nearing completion. We were almost time for fight week, or we were getting into fight week. Nurmagomedov was out due to a huge fever. Obviously, you worry about that. He had staph infection. That was part of the reason why. So, unfortunate that we didn't get that fight when we were supposed to get it. Fortunate that we do get it here. The other thing about these two guys, Mike Swick had an interview with Umar Nurmagomedov on his YouTube channel. Nurmagomedov shared the fact that he and Morozov trained together. Couldn't remember if it was 2015 or 2016, so they'd at least sparred together in the past. And the one other note that I had on this fight, the fact that Sergey Morozov, for as extensive as his record is, he competed and medaled in the European or Asian and World MMA Championships. And he lost to Nurmagomedov in the World Championships. He lost to Syed Nurmagomedov in a guillotine attempt. Lost that one. So, Matt, if we have a look at the odds in this fight, they're not close. It's the biggest discrepancy on the odds of the entire card. Nurmagomedov opened a minus 625 favorite. He's now a minus 517. For Morozov, opened a plus 450. He's now plus 380. Over on Topology, we have a limited sample size of votes because this fight was moved from UFC 257 over to our Saturday card. Only 100 votes, 94% have Nurmagomedov. It's a tricky fight, again, Matt, because you have the scrambling and wrestling abilities of Nurmagomedov in the back pocket. You have great setups and you have great striking. You know those push kicks, the long kicks. For Morozov, though, a known counter striker with a lot of power, and in 3 rounds, you know the power bar is most likely going to be there. How do you see this one going?
Okay, I don't know if we know the power bar is going to be there, because if you see a guy tire in 25 minutes, and yes, I understand, it's an extra 10 minutes of fighting, but you're going to get tired in a fight, especially fighting a guy like Umar Nurmagomedov, who will force you to wrestle. He will force you to strike. He won't just stand on the outside with you and let you fight at a pace that you're comfortable with. Now, for Nurmagomedov, I think there are opportunities to get caught. If he is going in there lazy against Morozov, if he goes out there and has a great first and second round, I could see Morozov maybe catching him with a big shot in the third. But for the most part, listen, I like the different kinds of strikes Nurmagomedov can throw. I like the grappling if he really needs to go to it. And I just like him at every stage of this fight. I think we get caught up a little too much in this guy has great knockout power, but the other guy's the better martial artist. I do think you have to pick the better martial artist pretty much every time, and that's Nurmagomedov in this one.
And I mean, again, the thing for me with Umar Nurmagomedov, I got to know him from Fight Nights Global before all the fights that I just profiled in great detail, and he was as green as they come. He'd go for a takedown. If he didn't get it, he'd kind of fiddle around in odd positions. Like, he just wasn't totally complete. And now you look at the striking, you look at the wrestling, everything's kind of come together, and he's been off for a year. What adjustments and things has he been able to add to his game? Because it's not like he's 35, almost 40 years old, and that's kind of it, and it's a wash. He's 12-0. He's a young guy looking to prove himself in the UFC. And again, it's unfortunate because the original fight they were supposed to have was UFC 254 with Khabib and Justin Gaethje. So
now you're fighting on a Wednesday morning.
It sucks that we lost that. And you're going from UFC 257 with Conor, and there would have been a bit of a narrative there having Khabib or Abubakar, or we've even seen, and I have to throw this name out there, a guy that you need to watch that's been in his corner in the past. I'm talking about Islam Mamedov. That's 19-1-1. That was a PFL. Shout out to him. Or Zubair Takigov. The list goes on. But for Umar Nurmagomedov, I think the ceiling's a little bit higher. Although, saying that, I wouldn't be surprised, again.
The ceiling's so much higher for Umar.
Sergey Morozov goes in there and looks to counter and looks to land. If he's really, really patient, you never know. But if he waits until the second round, the third round, and nothing's come to him that far, it's going to be a wash. You have to go with the favorite here. I'm going with Umar Nurmagomedov. You're in agreement here. We're both going with Russia's own Umar Nurmagomedov. Matt, we have a great card coming up from Fight Island in Abu Dhabi, headlined by Michael Chiesa and Neil Magny. Really looking forward to that and the rest of the card. Just keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. And it's always great to see fighters added to the women's flyweight division. We can get up and get excited for this one as we have Victoria Leonardo and Manon Fiorot making their respective UFC debuts. And Matt, for Shreveport, Louisiana's Victoria Leonardo, she's a commodity that a lot of people in North America have come to really recognize over the last couple of years. She's continued to put on really good performances over with Invicta. She was in the Phoenix series the second time around. Unfortunate that she ended up losing a second time around to Miranda Maverick there. But hey, it doesn't matter. You look at her last three fights. A little tricky where she got finished by Erin Blanchfield to start 2020. She picked up a big win in her second time out against Liz Tracy. And then after that, a win over on Contender Series against Chelsea Hackett, who was a really hype prospect coming out from Oceania with a great Muay Thai background, her father in her corner. You look at that fight and kind of some parallels between that fight and this fight. The fact that Leonardo was matched up with a younger striker, and I get it, these fighters are only a day apart. So it's 1 day's difference over on Topology, but it's still younger fighters. So you look at the fight against Hackett, Leonardo was a decent-sized underdog in that one, more than a 2-1, and she did get rocked at one point, but she was able to finish the fight on the mat from full mount, hammering away. If you look at Manon Fiorot, this is a fighter that I haven't been hyped about a French fighter like this since what?
Tom
Duquesnoy, Cyril Gane, maybe.
Kid.
I don't know. Alain Baudot. But Manon Fiorot has really been making moves, whether it was with the IMMAF championships back in 2017. She won them at bantamweight. You look at her pro debut. She took on Leah McCourt in Cage Warriors and lost a split decision. First round definitely went her way. The last two rounds probably went Leah McCourt's way, and she's really been a superstar over with Bellator on commentary and even in her fights. So for Manon Fiorot, she goes from that to EFC, and they call it The Fighter. It's like The Ultimate Fighter, but The Fighter Season 2. She goes there, wins that, beats the champion, and then she's queen of EFC. So then what does she do? She goes and fights with UAE Warriors. And I watched every fight, because you gotta. But she had 3 fights in 2020, finished all 3. And if you look at the level of competition, it's so-so. The first fight against Quebec's Corinne Laframboise was probably the toughest test because if you look at it, she totally outstrikes Laframboise. I don't know if I've ever seen a nose injury that bad. She looked like Arlovsky at the end of the second into the third. But she continues to pressure. She continues to try and land power shots. She was a champion jiu-jitsu fighter. And again, record's a little salty, but she is a good fighter. If you go back and watch that one, it was halfway competitive. The commentary with UAE Warriors, if you watch all 3 of those fights, incredibly one-sided for Manon Fiorot, so maybe just hit mute on that one. But she picks up a huge win there, ends it at the end of the third round. TKO win there. She beats Naomi Tataroglu, and that one wasn't really close at all. Tataroglu just kind of chased her around. And then if you look at her last win to win the belt, the flyweight belt that they created, she beat 6-1 Gabriela Campo. Again, Campo wasn't really on that level. It wasn't really a close fight whatsoever. Kind of looked like, the writing was on the wall probably 30 seconds before she finished it. But the big takeaway from Manon Fiorot is the fact that she has a kickboxing background, and you can see it in every single one of her fights. Her karate and her kickboxing are her championship type level thing that she possesses. The two things with that, throws a crazy kick to the body. She really tries to establish distance with that push kick to the body. She'll kick to the legs, kick to the body. She's good on her back foot. And she is, and I'm going to cue up the clip, she is the Maria Sharapova of MMA. So overall, Matt, in this fight, you got Sharapova taking on Leonardo. And if you look at Victoria Leonardo, very good base in MMA. She's a black belt in Kung Fu. She's got a bit of a jiu-jitsu background. Her striking's very good. Her and her husband, Brent, and it's mostly Brent, but Brent owns Elite Combat Academy in Shreveport. Trains sometimes with Andrea Lee. You see her training over in Texas with some different gyms. But overall, Victoria Leonardo, very competent fighter. And I just have to mention this before I throw it over to you. And I know I've talked quite a bit, but with Victoria Leonardo, you go back to the loss against Erin Blanchfield. She had her hands nice and low. Blanchfield landed one head kick in the first round that stunned her, and she cracked her head off the back of the mat. And then in the second round, didn't make any adjustments. One kick, two kick, fight's over. Then in her second fight against Liz Tracy, she starts to bring her hands up quite a bit more. She keeps a fist, but it's up kind of close to her head. And I remember thinking in the first round, oh, she's made the adjustment. Then in the second round, Laura Sanko goes, she's made the adjustment. In her fight against Chelsea Hackett, where, again, there's a lot of parallels between the fight with Fiorot here and the fight against Chelsea Hackett, being classically trained strikers, and especially, Muay Thai striker. Not to say it's totally similar to karate and kickboxing, but there are a lot of parallels that you can draw between the two of them. You can. Both strikers.
Not really
both strikers.
Karate, though.
But if you look at Leonardo, the start of that fight, her hand is glued to the side of her head. She is not getting head kicked, not losing that opportunity. Of course, again, she did get rocked early, but she ended up finishing the fight. I'm really excited about this one. I think there's a lot of potential with both of these fighters, maybe one more so than the other, but overall, I'm looking forward to it. What were some of your takeaways from this one here?
Okay, so for Victoria Leonardo, her issue is she doesn't do anything all that well, and we see this a lot, especially in sort of the lower level of women's MMA. Finishing ability really matters, and really overall aggressiveness matters. Fiorot has those in bunches, and that's what you're going to see. She's one of the few women's flyweights who will consistently get finishes because she's not afraid to really sit down on her shots and go for damage over volume sometimes. With Leonardo, she won't always just commit to either one of the games. She'll go for more of a volume-heavy gameplay. Now, she can incorporate the wrestling in a little bit more. Fiorot, though, for the most part, should be able to just beat her up on the outside. I really like the kicking game of her, the overall kicking game, and really, she fights like if you just heard Joe Rogan do commentary on like an Antonina Shevchenko fight. If you heard about, how great her kicks look and whatnot, it more describes what you're going to get from Fiorot than you would from an Antonina Shevchenko. Really nice Muay Thai, really good karate as well. Just sort of a uniqueness to the way in which she moves compared to a lot of other women at this division. And for really not just that reason, I like Fiorot a lot in this fight for how close the odds are.
I agree with you as well. I mean, for Victoria Leonardo, I think that she does have a lot of power. She moves forward quite well. She can chase some of her opponents.
She's short arms, though. That's the issue. She doesn't commit to her punches as much as she just throws them.
And the thing with Manon Fiorot, again, she moves so well on the outside, especially being a southpaw. It really throws a wrench into a lot of her opponents' plans. I know in the fight against Corinne Laframboise, that was kind of the issue, too. She was always moving, always doing something. And again, she establishes distance so well early on with that kick to the body, then she'll go to the leg, she'll go back to the body, where it just frustrates opponents to start making mistakes. The other thing with both of these fighters, I think if Victoria Leonardo is going to get a win in this fight, she probably has to try and take the fight to the mat. And I know if you look at Manon Fiorot, you probably think, well, she has such an extensive striking background. Her ground game is probably not all that great. She was willing to take the fight to the mat against Corinne Laframboise that had the background in jiu-jitsu. She's willing to do it in the other two fights as well. And again, Leonardo would probably have success with the wrestling. We've seen her have success with it in the past. Manon Fiorot, though, when she does get onto the ground, again, we've seen her in mount position a lot, but if she's in half guard, if she's in full guard, she's at least doing something to try and advance. She's always trying to rain down strikes, do something. So that's why this should be a very interesting fight. Again, you mentioned the odds, so let's bring them up. You have Leonardo opening a -110. They both open at par. She's now a +137 underdog. For Fiorot, she opened -110, now at a +165. Over on Tapology, limited sample size of the votes, 458, 61% going Manon Fiorot. You have 46% by decision, 47% by knockout. I'm really high on Manon Fiorot in this one. I'm taking the French fighter here. I think this is a huge opportunity. Again, she had the 3 fights with UAE Warriors, so you've already got the UFC brass moving in and out of Fight Island. You probably impressed them enough. I know the commentary team, again, I can't say enough. They were so biased. But overall, I really do like the game of Manon Fiorot here. If Leonardo gets a win, probably taking Fiorot down as early as she can, or maybe countering on a power shot. But overall, again, I like the beast Fiorot here.
So for Leonardo, she really has to limit the movement of Fiorot, and if she can get her up against the cage, not to use that as a damaging position, but really just use that to wear on the footwork and the movement of Fiorot as the fight continues. I'm going to side with Fiorot. I agree with you, Craig. I think she has the higher ceiling out of the two moving forward as well. But if you watch Leonardo in Invicta, she has a lot of those kind of just tricky veteran moves that a lot of people won't see. She has the wrestling. She is well-rounded. So very excited for this fight. And in a women's division where really 3-4 good wins can get you right up to the top. So entertaining fight.
Both of us going with Manon Fiorot to get the win. Overall, really looking forward to this card. We have Neil Magny taking on Michael Chiesa in the main event. 170-pound showcase. Really looking forward to it. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say. Let's get into it. As we always say with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it. But we also say flyweight never die. And this is one of those fights, I'm crossing both of my fingers that it actually happens, and it happens at flyweight. We have Hawaii's Tyson Nam taking on Danger Matt Schnell. Matt, this fight was already booked twice last year, and unfortunately for Tyson Nam, they really kind of screwed with his plans. They were supposed to fight back in September. That one fell out because Schnell missed weight, missed it by 2 pounds and collapsed, so they say behind the scenes, and it ended up Tyson Nam had to wait a week, fight Jerome Rivera on short notice at 135 pounds. He obviously finishes Jerome Rivera. Then the fight gets rebooked for December. That one falls out. Schnell out of that one. So now we get this one in January 2021. For Tyson Nam, he has one of the craziest roads to the UFC. He's in his mid-30s to late 30s now. He's got almost 30 pro fights. He fights Sergio Perez in his debut. And I don't have to tell you, you know how good Sergio Perez has looked in the UFC, but not just the UFC, in Bellator. The guy looks like he's going to absolutely wreck house. Maybe he's going to be able to beat Juan Archuleta for the belt. But for Tyson Nam, he fights Perez, he fights Kai Kara-France, and then he gets paired up with 2 guys that have no business fighting Tyson Nam whatsoever.
It's almost like Tyson Nam's developing into the new version of a Thomas Almeida, because you look at the guys who he's lost to. Okay, he lost to Kai Kara-France and Sergio Perez. There's no shame in that. And then, okay, who are your 2 wins? So you get matched up against a prospect, if you will, who was 3-1 at the time, and Zarrukh Adashev knocks him out in 32 seconds. And that was when a lot of people started being like, oh, wait, maybe Tyson Nam is really good, and his 2 losses are just, 2 losses to guys at the top of the division. Then he comes out, and again, you had mentioned this earlier on. Tyson Nam has had 2 short notice fights in his last 2 fights. And yes, he's looked really good, but I'm excited to see a full camp Tyson Nam, if you will. There's like C-level Cain Velasquez. Maybe full camp Tyson Nam could be one of those mythical figures of MMA. Matt Schnell does a lot of things better than Tyson Nam, though, and it's a real big question in this fight. Can Matt Schnell get past the early power of Tyson Nam and just sort of get past the big storm, get the fight to the ground where we know Schnell is so good from? Or will Matt Schnell, will he play the striking game with Tyson Nam? That's something that Matt Schnell, really, he just strikes too much for his own good. He's so good on the ground. He's really dangerous. He's got great control from the top position, but the issue is when he fights the guys like Alejandro Pantoja, when he fights guys like Rob Font, he won't just immediately go for takedowns like you probably should. He'll play the striking game. He'll try to set up the jab and then work on his right hand and then work his takedowns into his game. Where if you just look at his fights against, Jordan Espinosa, he submitted Louis Smolk, I guess, too. when he goes for and just kind of has one of those Damian Maia game plans where it's, okay, I'm going to go for single leg takedowns as much as I can, and then if I get the fight to the ground, then I work my submission game. Matt Schnell's a problem to deal with when he has that game plan. The issue is when he goes out there with the Pantoja, let's get into a brawl kind of mindset, he ends up getting clipped against these high-level strikers, and Tyson Nam just feels like another opponent who could do that to Matt Schnell.
The weird thing about it for Pantoja, you look at his overall career. He fought Elias Garcia in his third fight. Well, people have come to know Elias Garcia on a bigger stage. He fights a guy that we definitely all know by now in Jonathan Martinez at 125 pounds. He beats him. Where the hell is the home for Matt Schnell? I can't figure it out personally. I'm not involved in his camp because, again, it switches from Florida to Louisiana to Florida. It's all over the place. He was on The Ultimate Fighter. That was at flyweight. Then he fought Rob Font in the UFC. That was bantamweight. Will he get knocked out? Well, that's going to happen. Rob Font's a world-class fighter. Just beat Moraes in a big fight at 135. He fights Hector Sandoval. He loses that one. So what does he do? He rings off 4 big wins. So what's the scoop here? Now, I just did the whole pick number 3, my lord, thing from Shrek. But overall, he wins 4 big fights in a row and finishes 2 of them. Luis Smolka, good fighter. Jordan Espinoza, good fighter. And then he loses to Pantoja.
Good fighter.
The fights that he was supposed to have against Tyson Nam, again, botch weight cut, he withdraws. The weight cutting thing bugs me. Like, if you can't do it at 25, then let's see it at 35. For Tyson Nam, the poor guy just wants a fucking fight at 125 pounds. Okay. And you look at it, and Adashev's on short notice because you're supposed to fight Ryan Benoit, so they fight at 135. Adashev misses weight. He weighs in 138. Buddy, you're 5'5", and I know, like, it was super short notice.
Still got them hands, though.
You're a 3-1 fighter, but yes, Zarrukh Adashev missed weight for that fight, and then he fights Jerome Rivera, a guy that isn't really known as a bantamweight, and he beats him. And listen, I feel bad for Zarrukh Adashev and for Jerome Rivera because they're on this card. Like, we haven't done the predictions for their fights. They're on this card. And I get it. You're in quarantine for most of this whole fight week. You don't really get to enjoy it, but they're probably going to see Tyson Nam and relive the finishes that Tyson Nam threw their way. So
the breakfast room at the Marriott in Fight Island has got to be the weirdest place in the world.
This fight, overall, I love it. Again, we already made a prediction video for this one. We actually disagreed on the picks. I had Nam, you had Schnell going into it. So let's talk about the odds for this one because Tyson Nam opened a -135 favorite. He's now -130. For Matt Schnell, he went from a +105. He's now +106. About the same thing. Over on Topology, we have a decent sample size, 469 total votes, 71% going Nam, 74% saying he's going to win by knockout. Do I think Tyson Nam's going to knock out Matt Schnell? It could very well happen. He's a great counter striker. He has a ton of power, and normally his staying power a little bit later as far as that power is concerned. With Matt Schnell, we know how good his jiu-jitsu is. If he's going to fight Tyson Nam, he's got to have great jiu-jitsu because Tyson Nam, his takedown defense is quite good. Again, we have a small sample size from the UFC, but if you want to go back and watch some of his fights outside of the UFC, he's taken on Ali Bagutinov. He's taken on Zhalgas Shumagulov. Yes, he didn't win that fight. He's fought Jeremiah Labiano that you know from Bellator. He's fought some names that you know, and he's had some pretty good fights. We know that the takedown defense and offense is all right from Tyson Nam, but it is his power that really has gotten him to this point in his career. Overall, are you switching the pick? Am I switching my pick? What's your final say on this one?
I'm still going to go with Matt Schnell. Now, I don't like the botched weight cuts, if you will, in the past, but there's a lot of fighters who have done that, and I disagree with it at the time, and they go on to have extremely successful careers. Insert Khabib Nurmagomedov. So I do think if he can make weight safely, this is one of those question mark kicks finest. If he can make weight and he looks all right doing it, I do think Matt Schnell's going to get the win. Even if you go back and watch the fight with Pantoja, he was able to rock Pantoja right before he gets knocked out himself. And rocking a guy like Pantoja, again, you don't get points for rocking a guy and not winning the fight, but still, against a really high-level striker like that, at least he is having success on the feet. It's not like just going out there and getting run over in 5 seconds. Tyson Nam relies a lot more on his accuracy than I would say just his natural one-punch power. And it's kind of what you had mentioned, where he's not relying on the power to carry him into the third round, to still let him get knockouts. He's relying on the fact that he can just hit your chin really anytime during the fight. I think if Matt Schnell can make the fight really ugly, don't just stand at range with Tyson Nam and exchange kickboxing combinations with him. With the overall wrestling, with the jiu-jitsu, and really with the dirty boxing of Matt Schnell, I think he'll be able to get it done.
I don't love the odds here as far as just a parlay piece, a straight pick'em. So for me, I'm going to wait maybe again till the second round if there even is one. And I'm going to side with Schnell in that one. But again, I gotta wait till I see these guys win, because if this is a bad week for Matt Schnell, who knows? Maybe this fight gets scrapped for all different kinds of reasons. Hopefully it doesn't. Again, double fingers crossed from the start of the video. And I don't wish anything bad, and I realize I probably already jinxed it. But overall, I love this fight because, again, we consider this one as a possible fight of the night. If they both decide to strike, it could be a great fight. If Matt Schnell decides that he wants to grapple, well, again, I know how good of a wrestler Tyson Nam is, so we'll see what happens. But I do give a slight edge to this point to Matt Schnell. Again, I like the jiu-jitsu. I like the staying power. I don't love the chin, but we'll see how this one goes. And I'm going to have to wait again till I see the weigh-in, till I can have question mark kicks on Tuesday night to look forward to it. But as of now, I'm going with Matt Schnell. Matt, you're going with Matt Schnell. Matt Schnell's probably going with Matt Schnell. I don't think he wants to lose this fight. So really looking forward to this one. I think it's a great fight. Again, we're disagreeing with the odds. We're disagreeing with the Topology votes. Let us know who you're going with down below in the comments section. I think this is going to be a great fight. We have Neil Magny and Michael Chiesa in our main event. Warlley Alves taking on Mounir Lazzez in the co-main. So far, that one's locked in for that slot. So overall, keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, man, as we always say.
Let's get into it.
Really looking forward to our next fight. Coming in at lightweight, we have the Dragon Mason Jones making his UFC debut, the former Cage Warriors double champ, taking on Beast Boy Mike Davis. And Matt, for Mike Davis, this has to be noted straight out of the gate. I don't think I've ever seen a bigger step down in competition from your UFC debut to your second fight. And listen, I know Thomas Gifford follows along to Fight Night Picks over on Facebook. I apologize, Thomas. You have great hair, and you've won more than you lost in MMA, and I've never fought in MMA. So you got that, all of that over me.
But you're not Gilbert Burns.
But Mike Davis went from fighting Gilbert Burns on short notice at lightweight, the guy that's going to fight for the title from, that time to now, to Thomas Gifford. And listen, Mike Davis put on an absolute showcase in that fight. Looked absolutely amazing. We didn't get to see him in 2020, which is unfortunate because this is a guy that I have penciled in as must-see TV. Mike Davis, background, little bit of boxing, little bit of Muay Thai, a little bit of wrestling coming up through, and he really puts everything together when he fights in a cage. And for Mason Jones, coming out of Cage Warriors, his last two fights for the vacant lightweight and vacant welterweight belt. I mean, holy smokes, he's 10-0. It's like a knife through hot butter. He's trained a little bit at Team Alpha Male with some of the best in the world. Obviously hasn't trained there through the pandemic, but Wales has seen kind of like a resurgence of MMA where, again, yes, you had Jack Marshman and John Phillips, but the Jack Shores, the Mason Jones of the world, even Brett Johns to an extent, really making their mark in top-level MMA. This fight should really deliver because for Mason Jones, he's finished 7 of 10 fights, a lot of first-round knockouts in those finishes. And when he puts it together in the cage, it again, must-see TV on both sides. Possible fight of the night. I think so.
Oh, 100%. And Mason Jones' name doesn't get brought up enough in these types of conversations. I know we've done this before. We talk about who are the best boxers in MMA. And I know that's a lot of pressure to put on Mason Jones right now, calling him one of the best boxers in MMA. But at 25 years of age, he's really a guy who could enter into those conversations by the time he is up in the 29, 30s and really making his name in this division. Because Mason Jones, if you've been following along with his career over in Cage Warriors, I don't really want to say he has that Justin Gaethje allure when he does come to the UFC, because Gaethje walked right into a main event and he was the champ. But Mason Jones has that kind of all-violence title associated with his name. When you get a Mason Jones fight, it's going to be just such a high pace throughout the whole entire fight. He's going to go to the body. He can make it ugly. Not afraid to eat shots, to give shots, which in this fight's probably not what you're going to want to be doing. But if I'm Mike Davis, the first thing I do in this fight, I say, I'll call you Dragon, but you're going to call me Nighthawk. And Mason Jones might not know what you're talking about, but I think it'd be an awfully silly way to get the night started. Mike Davis has the power advantage over Mason Jones, and with Jones, it's odd because normally a lot of fighters who are really good at stand-up, they incorporate their kicks or they use a really long jab, and then they try to work their way into distance through those means. Mason Jones doesn't really have a lot of those range-finding attacks. He does sort of just kind of lunge in, and once he's in the pocket, that's where he's going to stay, because through his really boxing technique and power, a lot of guys won't want to stand there and trade shots with him. But when you're fighting Mike Davis, and again, there are two different versions of Mike Davis, because like you had said, we set him in there with Gilbert Burns, who Gilbert Burns just completely outclassed Mike Davis. He got him on the ground early, and if you're on the ground with Gilbert Burns, doesn't matter who you are, you're going to get submitted. But in the fight against Thomas Guilford, he showed a certain composure in the pocket that he's really going to need against Mason Jones. And I understand getting hit by Thomas Guilford's one thing, and I'm sure Mason Jones hits quite a bit harder. But if Mike Davis can really stay composed, and if he can just withstand those flurries of Mason Jones and stay in the pocket and throw his own shots, he's going to win that power game 9 times out of 10, and it'll just be a matter of time until he finds the right shot. What worries me, though, is if Mason Jones starts landing power shots early, and if he can really weaponize his gas tank against Mike Davis, I think it could pay dividend.
And I mean, we've seen that with Mason Jones too. Again, I talked about the first round finishes. Adam Proctor, first round finish. Joe McColgan coming in on short notice, replacing Danilo Belluardo back in March. That one was over in the first round. Decision over Alexei Manikivi, and again, a lot of people might recognize that name. Had a fight against Soren Bach that went so-so. Decision win over Donovan Desme that a lot of people are familiar with on the Cage Warriors scene. First round finish over Kakper Formella. Decision win over Conman Day. And then again, Craig Edwards finish, Lawrence Tracy finish, Brett Hassett, and Sean Luther all finishes. Again, Mason Jones can kind of do it a lot of different ways, and that's really something you have to look forward to and like. And if you look at Mike Davis and we go down through the record, a loss to Gilbert Burns, it's going to happen. A loss to Sadiq Youssef on Contender Series, look at Sadiq Youssef now. Again, he continues to shine. And for Mike Davis, well, he went from that loss to finishing Elvin Leon Brito, a couple of fights against Jacob Kilburn, and then beats Carlos Guerra to get a shot in the UFC. So overall, really good extensive, amateur background for Mike Davis, undefeated. In MMA, he has plenty of finish wins. His boxing standout, his wrestling standout.
One of the better Island Fight highlight reels is Mike Davis.
And Chase Sherman. But if you really want the quotable, this one from Lucas Grandsire, friend of the show. Mike A. doesn't like plain water, but that's not neither here nor there in the circumstance. I never wanted to be a fighter was a Mike Davis quotable. And that is directly out of Mike Davis's mouth. Matt throwing shade.
I just did something Mike Davis has never done.
But Mike Davis, one of those guys that, bullied, so he get into fighting to kind of ward off the bullies. It's honestly a GSP story, and GSP came out today as we're taping this and said, I didn't really like being a fighter. He liked the training aspects. Mike Davis, one of those guys that I know he likes PS5. I know he didn't fight in 2021, various reasons. Well, it was a quotable from, again, you got to watch the interviews. But Mike Davis is one of those guys that doesn't really put a lot of thought into the fight that's ahead of him. He just gets into the cage and fights and normally puts on very incredible performances. So overall, this is a good one. I'm really looking forward to it. I think both guys have very high ceilings. I think agree. Mason Jones, maybe a little young coming in here, but he has the experience. Again, 10 pro fights, undefeated, double champ. So you have to throw it his way. If you look at the odds, I was a little bit surprised because Mike Davis opened a minus 300 favorite. He's now minus 194 rather. For Jones coming in here, plus 250 now, a plus 161. If we have a look at the Tapology votes, Jones favored 439 total votes, 70% going Jones, 59% seeing him to see or win by decision as the wheels are coming off from me. Overall, this is a really tough fight to predict, Matt.
Oh, it really is. And it comes down to the fact that Mason Jones has to enter the danger zone, if you will, and not just any temperature between 4 degrees Celsius and 60 degrees Celsius, or that song by Kenny Loggins. He's going to have to get into that close boxing range of Mike Davis. And for Jones, that's where he'll find the most success, but that's also where he will receive the most damage. It's just the fact that Mike Davis has so much more power than Jones, especially in this fight. I like Davis. I do think early on he's going to be able to land bigger shots, and then as the fight progresses, I'm not going to predict TKO by any means just because Mason Jones is a really high-level fighter, but I do like the power advantage that Mike Davis has in this one.
I will be fully transparent and honest in this one. I threw Jones in as a parlay piece. I really like those odds. I like them really early on. I still like them now as an underdog. But overall, if I'm given the pick, Mike Davis in this one I do like. Again, in tight, in the pocket. The combinations are crazy. The power's there. The wrestling's there. There's a lot of things that I like from Davis in this fight. And a Mason Jones wins, it helps me. But B, it really sets him up well in the UFC. So overall, we're both going with Mike Davis as the pick here. I'm really looking forward to this fight. A lightweight showcase, a possible fight in the night. One that you definitely can't miss, and another one that you definitely can't miss. Our main event, we have Magny and Chiesa. So make sure you keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we continue along through this one. And as we always say, let's get into it. Really looking forward to our next fight at bantamweight, and yes, the Figueiredos are multiplying. We have Francisco Figueiredo making his UFC debut, coming in here off a draw with Jungle Fights avenging a loss? Can you avenge a loss with a draw? We'll talk about that fight a little bit later on. But Francisco coming in here 11-3-1, and he's a really diverse striker. He can really bring it from both angles and throw a lot at you, really frustrating his opponents. He will be taking on Santa Fe, New Mexico's Jerome Rivera. And Matt, I don't know how Jerome Rivera feels about Lawrence Gowan coming in from Canada, stealing the Sticks main stage, but he has the nickname of the Renegade, and overall, he can definitely bring it in his own special way. In MMA, he's a jiu-jitsu practitioner. Styles make fights. What do you make of this one?
So this will be an interesting fight. We've gone back and sort of watched not the lesser Figueiredo, but just, other Figueiredo. And it is interesting. He fights in a very similar style to his brother Davison, but it's odd when you watch him. He's got weird kind of movement on the feet. And I say that as a way, and yes, he does mimic his brother, where he's sort of got that old-timey boxing stance where one of his arms out and the other one's back. But also, he'll mix it up and go orthodox and southpaw. And something that I bring it up a lot when we talk about how Kevin Lee's a great fighter. He's this great striker. He's a great wrestler. But Kevin Lee's a really good example of a guy who switches stances when he probably shouldn't. How when he's an orthodox fighter, he's really good, he can do everything. But when he goes into southpaw, his defense really takes a big hit. And for Francisco Figueiredo, he's got the opposite of that problem. From southpaw, he's actually really good defensively. He moves his feet a lot more, it seems. He's a lot more just sort of aware of the fight. Whereas when he is in the orthodox position, he's more power heavy. He will plant a little bit more in. Something he does very similar to his brother. Davison Figueiredo's got that beautiful sort of pullback counter shot. It's very Conor McGregor-esque, where it's get my head out of range and then counter you with a shot, collapse all that distance. Francisco Figueiredo will go for that, but it's not like he has the same reaction time of his brother, and he doesn't really have the same power. Again, it's hard when you are comparing these two, because we're comparing a guy making his UFC debut with limited sample size out on him versus his brother, who is currently one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. But there are certain comparisons that you can make specifically between their styles. And it's not as contrasting as, let's say, a Herbert Burns and a Gilbert Burns, where you look at Gilbert and you're like, okay, well, that's like a guy who's already there. And Herbert, who they don't really fight in the same style. For all intents and purposes, Francisco Figueiredo does have a similar skill set to Davison. It's just he doesn't have the intangibles, where he doesn't have the overwhelming power or the overwhelming reaction time. He still does have sort of the foundation of his brother, but he doesn't have those real big X factors that put him over the top. And that last fight in the draw, weird fight, I think it's fair to say. Don't ever take Francisco Figueiredo down next to the cage. That's all I'm going to say.
It's a really weird fight, so let's go through it. Because, again, it was a draw, which is weird that you'd have a fighter in his last 5 fights, he's got a loss. And, again, we talked about avenging. It's a split decision loss to Eduardo Souza with Jungle Fights. It's for the belt at bantamweight. There are 3-round fights there because Walid Ismail says screw the other 2 rounds. So he loses the fight to Souza. That's almost 3.5 years ago. He beats Vitor Leandro, who's 6-2 or 12. Manuel dos Santos 7-1. It's a salty 7-1. And then Souza again. You watch the fight. The first round's really close. And again, Figueiredo, when he's in southpaw, he throws a lot of great tie kicks. He'll go for your body. It's really good. When he goes from orthodox, he decides, I'm going to put them hands on him, and they're kind of labored. He tries to throw with a lot of power. He gets hit a lot himself. He's not very defensively sound from the orthodox stance. So in the first round, it's close, but again, I gave it to Figueiredo. If you gave it to Souza, you could make an argument either way. The second round, he decided to go all Augusto Sakai on everyone. Souza goes to take him down, and Figueiredo goes 2 hands onto the cage to grab it. For safety, for whatever. The referee automatically stops the fight, brings Figueiredo into the middle, and takes a point. So automatically you're down on the scorecards in that respect. I gave that round to Souza, so for me it was a 10-8. It was close, but to me, again, I had it for Souza. You can make an argument. The last round, I had it for Figueiredo. Again, continued to really put on a pace. He had Souza cut. I think it was in the second round into the third. The third, it started to pour down. He had some top control. He started to pull away a little bit. Again, they called this fight a draw. I had it, 28-28 with the second round of 10-8 for Souza and 2 10-9s for Figueiredo. Regardless, there's definitely a lot of holes from Francisco Figueiredo, and the last time he fought was a year and 3 months ago. Jerome Rivera, much more active. You look at his last 5 fights. He lost to Brandon Royval, where he was going up against the cage, or he got pushed up against the cage, broke his arm, things like that happen, I guess, freak accident. Before that, a loss to Roberto Sanchez. Sanchez got a shot into the UFC off of that one. Obviously no longer in the UFC, but still a name nonetheless. Then Rivera really goes on a run. And I know we talked about it in his UFC debut against Tyson Am. He had a lot of demons in his past he had to kind of overcome, and now he's been a lot more active. He's still young, too, only 25 years old, almost 26. He beats Kendrick Latchman. He beats, Jean Perez, Kendrick Latchman. He beats Luis Rodriguez over on Contender Series. He's about a 2-1 favorite in that one. Punches his ticket into the UFC, fights Tyson Am, predictably loses on short notice. So, coming into this fight, there's a few things that I really want to accentuate. Francisco Figueiredo has all-right takedown defense. He has all-right wrestling. I wouldn't say he's a standout jiu-jitsu practitioner, but he can hold his own. He's a good striker.
He is a good striker.
But he's a lot better striker in southpaw than he is from orthodox. Jerome Rivera, more of a southpaw striker as well, if he does strike. But his striking's not a strong suit. His wrestling's not a strong suit. His jiu-jitsu definitely is. The weird thing that I've seen, and again, you can't boil it down into simplicities. Francisco Figueiredo, black belt in jiu-jitsu. Jerome Rivera, not a black belt in jiu-jitsu. Does that matter? Not necessarily. You look at certain high-level MMA fighters, they might not have a black belt in jiu-jitsu. That's not the be-all, end-all.
Khabib doesn't.
Khabib doesn't, exactly. For Francisco Figueiredo, he's got a black belt in Muay Thai. That's definitely going to help in this fight. He's gone this far in his MMA career. He's got, 15 pro fights? And, 15 pro fights. And he's never fought at flyweight before. Why at age 31, after over a year away, do you want to fight at flyweight? Well, yes, my brother fights at flyweight. Do I have to fight at flyweight? So if I decide to fight at lightweight, does Matt have to fight at lightweight? Is this how brothers work? I know...
We're like the Morris brothers in the NBA. Whatever tattoo you get, I have to get the same one.
On the scale of brothers, where do these guys fall? Are we Nick and Nate Diaz? Or are we like Dan and Jim Miller? Where are we at here?
They're the handle. No. Okay, Figueiredo, I do think there are positives. It is odd, though, that he is fighting at his brother's weight class. And I always think about this, and I think about the Shevchenkos as well. Your whole goal is to become champ. How do you become champ if your brother is currently the champ? And listen, maybe they get along different than Craig and I do, but I probably wouldn't fight Craig if he held a UFC belt. And again, this is a crazy world where Craig is holding a UFC belt and I'm currently rising the ranks to become said champion. But it always is odd. We do see this a lot, though. Guys who are champs outside of the UFC, there'll be a flyweight champ, or not flyweight, there'll be a bantamweight champ, they'll move down to flyweight, or there'll be a welterweight move down. People always seem to pick the lighter weight class that they can make because they want to have the biggest advantage possible when they are at the biggest show available. So for Figueiredo, this is a fight where really everything's pointing in his direction from a promotional standpoint. You want Francisco Figueiredo to win this fight. For Jerome Rivera, it was a small sample size we were able to see of him in his last fight in the UFC. Fighting Tyson Am on a week's notice, though, UFC's not doing you any favors with that matchup, so you can't put a whole lot of stock into that. But Figueiredo is a very dangerous striker. He's got good power. He's got good head movement. And the fact that he can sting you with either hand, with kicks, with punches, he can switch stances, I like a lot from Figueiredo. Not saying I like his ceiling in the division long term, but I do like Figueiredo in this fight.
I wouldn't put any hard-earned money on this one whatsoever. If we talk about the odds, Rivera open to -125, now +116. For Figueiredo, open +105, now -142. So the lines have shifted. If you look at the Topology votes, it's two out of three are going with Rivera. 514 total votes, 67% Rivera. Majority have him to win by decision, 82%. I'm also going Figueiredo, but again, probably not one of the most confident picks on this card. Just based on that last performance, I've seen that he can kind of hang with a guy that wants to grapple, that wants to strike with a little bit of power. In Souza, how good Souza, I don't know. Figueiredo, if you look at it, and again, you want to talk about people that deserve UFC shots, Francisco Figueiredo is Devison's brother. Here's why he's here. Because, and again, not that this really matters, he's the 95th ranked regional bantamweight in Brazil. Just for context, if you want to go through those rankings, at number 38, there's a guy that's 8-10-1, and at number 66, there's a guy that's 10-11.
They don't mean anything, Greg.
The
Topology region.
This guy's ending up in the UFC. But Matt, we're both going with this guy that's ending up in the UFC in Francisco Figueiredo. Overall, really looking forward to this card. We got a great main event coming up between Michael Chiesa and Neil Magny. So Matt, keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say.
Let's get into it.
Explosive matchup coming up next. We have Congo's Dalcha Lungiambula, better known as Dalcha Champ, the former EFC heavyweight and light heavyweight champ, taking on a short notice replacement in Maluco Markus Perez. Matt, we have talked about Dalcha Champ probably all of November, all of December, now into January. Why? Because he's supposed to fight Carl Roberson, and now Markus Perez. And listen, overall, I was looking forward to those Kyle Roberson matchups because Dalcha was going to be moving from 205, where I wouldn't say he's been a mainstay, but he has been at 205 for some time, moving down to 185. He spent time training in camp for that one with Black Cobra Striking Systems' own, a man who hates sleeves, Dewey Cooper, one of my favorite coaches out there in MMA, just because of the no sleeve fact, and that's pretty much it. But he had been training with Dewey Cooper and a lot of the fighters in Vegas getting ready for that fight. You know, we really accentuated a lot of different aspects of Dalcha's game. You can go back and check out that preview in the tab for the Roberson fight. But overall, that fight's a lot different from this one. And I had a lot of worries and reservations going into the fight with Roberson because, again, it got really close to, you know, game time for the first booking when Dalcha would have been cutting the weight. I was worried. And he didn't weigh in. And then in the second time, he weighed in as kind of an alternate. And I put it there in the graphic. He weighed in 185.5. So not like it was a huge issue. And those fights were only spaced out by about a week or two. Now he's coming into this fight, again, on short notice against a fellow striker. I think it's fair to say Markus Perez by now. Not necessarily a grappler because he's really a guy that's oddly become happy with his hands in Markus Perez. And if you look at Markus Perez, taking a fight like this on short notice, sure, there's some upside because you beat a former UFC champ, but this is a tough fight to take on short notice.
It is a really weird one, and we were both in agreement. Listen, Kyle Roberson stylistically is a very bad matchup for Dalcha Lungiambula because he's so much more just refined as a technician on the feet. Markus Perez doesn't really have that going for him, though. So if Dalcha just... Let's say Dalcha comes in here like he does most fights. Just bum rushes Perez. We're going to see what happens. He can crack Perez and put him down pretty quick because Perez will throw those big looping shots with you. He will get into one of those Max Holloway, Ricardo Lamas-esque scraps where it's, okay, I'm going to give a shot to eat a shot. Dalcha Champ's not the guy you want to be doing that against. And unless he's got a front kick like Ankalaev that we don't really know about and he's just going to pull that out at some point, I don't know how Markus Perez wins this fight. Because when I look at how you beat a guy like Dalcha Champ, you either need cardio, a really good wrestling game, a really good submission game, or you have to be technical on the feet. Do any of those things really describe Markus Perez in the year 2021? Not really. Like, he is a good grappler if he gets the fight to the ground. He has anaconda chokes. He choked out Ian Heinisch back in LFA. Like, he has a good skill set on the mat. The issue is, it's not like that's his active goal is, okay, I'm going to throw hands, and then once I get close, I'll work for a takedown, then I'll work my way to your back, and then, you know, step 1 to step 5, eventually get the rear naked choke. He's going to go out there, really just kind of brawl with you, and if he drops you or if there's a slip or whatnot, he will engage in the grappling at that point, but it's not his number one goal. And if that was his goal, let's say I knew what I know about Markus Perez, I know his background, I know how good of a grappler he is, I see how many wins he has by submission, I'm fairly confident going into this fight against Dalcha. But the issue is, that's not really how he fights anymore. He goes out there looking for the scrap, and we saw that in Dricus du Plessis in his last fight, where he lands a couple good shots. Du Plessis didn't really look like he wanted to be in there, to be completely honest. Perez lands a few good shots, gets this massive confidence boost, and then just runs in kind of reckless and, you know, oh, hey, you're a boxer now. So if you do that against Dalcha, you're going to sleep.
Let's focus on that du Plessis fight really quick, because, again, a couple of guys come from EFC and Dricus du Plessis and Dalcha Lungiambula. And for Dricus du Plessis, I don't think it's that he didn't want to be in there. He was so excited to be there that it was almost like he had the jitters and he really couldn't get started. So Perez finally kind of woke him up after some of those shots, which, again, you don't want to see that. But UFC debut, octagon jitters are a real thing. Du Plessis ate a lot of shots and then finally gave some and finished Markus Perez in that fight. And that's the thing. I look at Markus Perez, again, let's gauge it out of the last 5. Because if it really starts with Ian Heinisch winning the LFA belt, you beat James Boknovic no longer in the UFC, you lose to Andrew Sanchez, you beat Anthony Hernandez, you lose to Turman, you lose to Dricus du Plessis. Where does Dalcha Lungiambula fall into the talent pool, and who can I kind of compare him to, and in what fight can I kind of compare him to? For me, probably the Aldierte Sanchez fight, probably, if I had to really throw him in there. Because if I'm talking about a guy like Dalcha Champion, this is a national judo champ, an African champion in judoka, 2006, 2007, parlays that into MMA. And again, like a lot of wrestlers that we see, it's odd that I would say this and make the comparison, but with extreme couture guys, you see a lot of wrestlers go there. They have tons of power in their hands, and then all of a sudden they're power strikers. Dalcha's kind of like that in certain respects, where he has that strong judo background. You don't see him engaging in clinches. You don't see him really throwing people, going for a ton of takedowns. You see him absolutely destroying people with highlight reel knockouts, or, in the case of his last fight, getting knocked out by Magomed Ankalaev with that huge head kick. So if you look at Dalcha, and again, in his last few fights, the Daquan Townsend fight finishes him. Andrew Van Zyl, again, decision, so again, that doesn't really prove the point. Alain Baudot that you've seen in the UFC, somewhat surprisingly. That was one of the craziest knockouts I think we've seen in a while, where he flattened him out stiff like a board. So again, in this one, Dalcha, been working on his striking with Dewey Cooper. Say what you will about him. He's a striking coach, if anything. You don't have to worry about him making middleweight, or at least you didn't in his last fight, or getting ready for his last fight. He was able to make the weight successfully. I know a lot of people are going to ask in the comments, and they're going to hit me up in the DMs and say, is this fight at light heavyweight or middleweight? Because Topology has it as light heavyweight. Please, I have to throw this disclaimer out here now. Don't believe everything you see on Topology. It says Ramzan Amiv's reach is 69 inches. Don't believe it. I love Topology, but don't believe everything you read on Topology. MMA Fighting, MMA Junkie, and the UFC have said that this fight's going to take place at middleweight. Topology says it's at light heavyweight. We'll see what happens, but if everybody says middleweight and the one site you go to says light heavyweight, just check out a couple of other sources. I have to throw that out there. But in terms of this fight at middleweight, again, if Dalcha makes the weight and everything works out, I have Dalcha winning this, and I haven't even talked about the odds.
So I agree with a lot of what you said, but I don't really agree with how you got there. So Andrew Sanchez does not fight like Dalcha champ at all. Andrew Sanchez will wrestle
level at where they're at in the division. At that point in time, I think Dalcha and Andrew Sanchez are a decent litmus test in terms of where they're at.
For Dalcha, though, every Dalcha fight really comes down to it's binary. It's either he's going to knock you out or you're going to beat him by decision. And yes, the Ankalaev fight, excuse me, it is a bit of an outlier. I know he did get knocked out himself, but for the most part, Mark Hunt used to talk about this a lot. You're never going to win a decision looking for a knockout. And Dalcha champ almost always is looking for that knockout. And you're going to see cardio issues with him at a certain point, because there are going to be fights where he thinks he has a guy hurt. He's going to rush at them. He isn't going to get the finish. And then you're just going to kind of have a labored pace throughout the fight. This fight's going to be really good for about 4 minutes, and then it's going to fall off an absolute cliff, because Markus Perez has the same issue where it's not to the same degree where he's going to throw that one big explosion and then just be tired. He sort of fights with a labored pace throughout, and it's never like he reaches this big crescendo and then he crashes down. He just never has this overwhelming pace at any point of the fight. This fight for me comes down to who is controlling the center of the cage. Whoever gets backed up towards the cage is not going to have a very good night. And I think Luke Thomas was the first person to talk about this, how getting backed up behind those two black lines in the UFC cage matters a lot more than I think people realize. And it comes down for both these guys. If Perez is the guy getting Dalcha up against the cage, if he can start working in some takedown attempts and land in combination on Dalcha, you can start to wear him down. The issue is, if you're doing that, the Koreshkov-Douglas Lima fight's a pretty good example of where Koreshkov has Lima up against the cage. He thinks he's having a ton of success, and Lima throws one massive bomb that catches Koreshkov and puts him out. That could be a likelihood in this fight, but I really do think whoever's being the aggressor will have more success, and I think that's going to be Dalcha.
And I mean, we've seen it, especially in that Dalcha fight against Ankalaev. He pushes the pace, has a ton of success, but when he gets pushed back, he doesn't. And if you look at Markus Perez, well, really, the fight against Andrew Sanchez is the perfect example.
All of his fights.
When he gets pushed back up against the cage, Dricus du Plessis, when he kind of started to put a pace on him. Wellington Turman, whatever you think of him in the UFC, that's another one. If we look at the total Topology picks, 417 of them, 87% Dalcha Lungiambula, 86% by knockout. If we look at the odds, Dalcha started a minus 350 favorite, now minus 142. Perez opened 260. He's now at a plus 117. I'm going Dalcha champion in this one. Again, I didn't have him to beat Karl Roberson. I had Karl Roberson to win that one overwhelmingly because, again, the glory acumen, the kicking game of Karl Roberson, the fact that he could slow him down. But with a guy like Markus Perez, again, what's he good at? The jiu-jitsu's pretty good. Well, Dalcha champion, way, like in his wallet and a couple of the folds under some receipts, has that judo background, like way back there. But again, I like the power, and if he's able to crack with some of those looping shots, I think Dalcha's got the win here.
Yeah, exactly. Again, this fight's going to be great until it isn't. And once it starts going bad, it's going to get bad pretty quick. I'm just going to warn everyone for that. But I do think Dalcha's going to be able to get the stoppage win, probably in the first round.
Matt, both of us going with Dalcha Lungiambula to get his second win in the octagon here against a short notice replacement in Markus Perez. Really looking forward to this card. Great co-main event. Warlley Alves taking on Mounir Lazzez. And in our main event, we have Michael Chiesa taking on Magny. Get locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say.
Let's get into it.
We've been spending most of our lives living in a striker's paradise, Matt. We have Mudaerji taking on Zarrukh Adashev in a battle of the nicknames, the Tibetan Eagle taking on the Lion. And this is a great fight. I mean, with Mudaerji, there were a lot of question marks surrounding him coming into the UFC, level of competition. It wasn't like he had fought the best names, and he was coming in on a loss, which was really strange. Took on Luis Smolka, got finished in that fight, and everybody was pretty down on him, myself included. Well, what does he do? He comes back, beats Andre Sukumtok by decision, and then he fights Malcolm Gordon at 125 pounds. And listen, I know Malcolm Gordon in the UFC hasn't looked all that good. If you watched his TKO tape, he was pretty good. I mean, comes out of a good gym here in Canada. And Mudaerji finished him in under a minute and looked absolutely amazing. So, China's Mudaerji now taking on Zarrukh Adashev. 3-2, probably one of the saltier records you're going to find in the UFC. I know Mike Jackson has a fight coming up. He's 1-1, but Zarrukh Adashev 3-2. If I can break that record down a little bit, his first pro fight was back in 2015. He lost that one. Then he won 3 in a row, and then he lost his last fight on incredibly short notice, taking on Tyson Nam. He got finished in under a minute himself, got absolutely flatlined. It looked really bad. Those 2 fights at bantamweight, the 3 wins all at flyweight, and good thing for him, this one is at flyweight. Unfortunate for him that his last fight was a bantamweight based on the picture you can see next to us because he looks thick. And the other trouble that I have, he missed bantamweight. He weighed in 138, so that's never good to see. Hopefully the weight cut's good. This guy's a true professional and a great striker. You might know him from his time with Glory. He has a great background in kickboxing, a total record of 16-3. And, I mean, in MMA, didn't really take on the best level of competition. Christian Medina in Bellator, 0-1 at the time. Ron Leon, 0-2. And then Tevin Dice was 3-1. He hadn't really faced a great level of competition. Adashev had a decent first round. In the second round, just lit a fire under his ass and beat up poor Tevin Dice. So that's pretty much the story on Zarrukh Adashev so far. Very polished striker. He's been getting better at his wrestling. You've seen a progression fight over fight, which is nice to see. He had a long layup between his first fight against Cody Mooney that he lost by submission and the next one against Christian Medina that he won. But overall, Zarrukh Adashev, pretty limited in his game. I mean, again, he only has 5 MMA fights. He's very much a striker, and that's what he's comfortable with. And for Mudaerji, again, you might not love the record, and you might not love those 2 fights sandwiched in there in the losses, but overall, he's really shown some flashes of brilliance in the cage. Hopefully, for Uzbekistan's Zarrukh Adashev, we get to see some of that. I'm eager to see this fight. It should be a good one.
It really will be. I think this should be a phenomenal fight. Zarrukh Adashev is in a really weird position right now, and I think you can draw upon some examples of other primary kickboxers that we've seen transition over into MMA. Look at Brad Riddell. Even go back and look at Brad Riddell's earlier fights in MMA. His striking doesn't look that good, and it's not because now he's training MMA striking. It's because now he's comfortable with his level of grappling along with his striking. So he's not constantly throwing strikes thinking, okay, well, every time I do this, I'm going to leave myself open for the takedown. It's more just a level of comfort that Riddell has been able to get. Fiziv's another guy, like Chikaze, like there are other examples. Adashev is in the early stage of his transition to MMA. You can tell that, yes, if he is able to get into these long, extensive striking battles in MMA, he'll be able to have great success. But the issue right now is that 5 fights into his MMA career, those question marks are still there. Every time you do throw a kick, every time you are throwing a lengthy combination and leaving your body open, that's going to be in the back of your mind of, am I going to get taken down and choked out? Not that Mudaerji's this dominant wrestler by any means, but he's definitely a better wrestler than what we've seen out of Adashev. And Adashev, too, it's no thanks to him, I guess, that his first loss was against Tyson Nam. Listen, fighting Tyson Nam on a week's notice, we've seen it before. It doesn't really end all that well. Really, it never ends all that well. So for Adashev, this is a good example to go in there against another primary striker and hopefully allow your skill set to really be shown. Because I do think if we are able to see longer glimpses of Adashev, we can really appreciate what his striking is. Throws kicks from both sides, can throw spinning kicks, really techniques that most people who are just MMA strikers aren't going to be used to. The issue is, Mudaerji is on an absolute heater right now, and he was a guy who, I agree with you, after that Smolka fight, it's not like I expected Mudaerji to have a very long and prosperous UFC career, but coming off those last 2 wins, and especially the Malcolm Gordon win, where going in, listen, we like Malcolm Gordon, TKO alumni, he has a match, or at least a style that you think would give Mudaerji issues. That wasn't even a competition. Mudaerji just went out there, dominated him early on. And again, I'm not going to predict that we're going to get a Mudaerji early knockout, but I just like the level of comfort that Mudaerji has with his overall MMA game. And yes, he's a primary striker, but I do think this is a good example of you're a primary striker who, as a striker, Mudaerji might not be as good as Adashev, but he has all those other tools in his MMA game plan right now, where Adashev is slowly starting to incorporate the wrestling and the jiu-jitsu components. So yes, Adashev might be the better pure striker, but the fact that he doesn't have all those other components into his game yet are going to show that his MMA striking isn't at a high enough level to be with Mudaerji.
And Mudaerji coming in here, it says 25 years of age over on Tapology, so maybe it is on his birthday. Exactly. We'll have to see about that one, but overall 11 knockouts in MMA out of his total 13 wins. It's a very interesting one in terms of the picks over on Tapology. 438 so far, 95% with Mudaerji and 77% having to win by knockout. If we have a look at the odds, Matt, Mudaerji opened a minus 265. He's now minus 384 on best fight odds. For Zarrukh Adashev, plus 205 to a plus 296. I think unless Mudaerji makes a huge mistake in this one, he should be able to win it. Again, it's not totally based on the fact that it's a guy that's 13-4 taking on a guy that's 3-2. But Zarrukh Adashev, out of the wins, you got to consider this. I mean, you beat a guy that's 0-1, 0-2, and Tevin Dice, if I'm not mistaken, and I'll check here in front of everybody, hasn't had a fight since he lost. No, he hasn't fought since he lost. Now, again, more could be said about the state of regional MMA, but yeah, I mean, it's to me, it seems like Mudaerji no-brainer. If Zarrukh Adashev runs in there and goes full glory, full Giga Chikadze, that'd be the cat's ass for him and this division, but I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, I've got Mudaerji all day. And the real question is, do you think Adashev can have sort of a long and prosperous MMA career? Like, do you think he can shore up those holes that he has in his skill set and go on to get wins in MMA? Or is this probably just kind of what we're going to get from here on out?
He went from the Bellator 232 prelims, which, again, you know what people think about Bellator prelims. Ask John Franklin. But he went from the Bellator 232 prelims, McDonald Lima 2,
great card,
to fighting Tyson Nam and getting knocked out in 32 seconds. Like, it's the same thing in this fight as it is with Mike Davis when he went from Gilbert Burns to Thomas Gifford. You went from Tyson Nam, Mudaerji, and then all of those guys that really inflated your record, but didn't really pose you the biggest threat. So, for me, Zarrukh Adashev being in the UFC, it's really going to stun his growth in MMA being at this stage. And it's unfortunate. It really is.
Yeah, no, I agree.
All right, Matt. We're both going with China's Mudaerji to get the win. Really looking forward to this card overall. We got a great main event between Michael Chiesa and Neil Magny. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt. As we always say. Let's get into it. Interesting fight at bantamweight as we have Vancouver, Washington's own Ricky Simone, who was originally scheduled to be taking on Boom Brian Kelleher, now going in to face El Tigre Gaetano Pirrello out of Belgium, and I have it up on the screen, Italy, or Belgium by way of Italy. But this dude is a striker. And I know a lot of people are going to draw on the fact that he fought Arnold Allen 6 years ago or over 6 years ago and he lost that one by decision. But if you go through and watch his fights, very, very aggressive fighter, very quick to close distance. He loves the tie clinch. He loves to throw knees up the middle. He throws a lot of power strikes. His cardio's half decent. His grappling's not that great. But overall, he's a very exciting fighter. And a little bit surprised that this is who they tapped to be the short notice replacement because he hasn't fought in a little over a year. Somewhat similar to Francisco Figueiredo that we also have on this card. And for Gaetano Pirrello, again, you just have to really speak to the striking roots. He's a K1 champ in Europe. He's trained with some of the best in the business. I know in one of his recent fights, and there's a lot of tape on Gaetano Pirrello, so you can't be lazy on this one, but he had Tom Duquesnoy in his corner. Tom,
the Fire Kid.
Where are you at?
Modeling.
Tom Duquesnoy. But overall, going back and watching a lot of Gaetano Pirrello fights, it's really exciting to watch him fight. He always brings it fight of the night type style if he gets matched up with a striker. I mean, you look at his last loss against Josiro Boye. I know Boye in his last fight ended up fighting Kurt Hollabaugh on that card that they had down in Georgia there this past year. Kind of crazy. He lost that fight. He was on a heater, and that was a rematch because Pirrello had won the first fight. Boye goes in there, and, you know, it's not the most competitive fight at the start. Pirrello's pouring it on him. Boye gets it to the ground, and Pirrello can't really get back up to his feet. And then if you watch the second round, Pirrello really tries to pour it on again, and Boye lands a couple of good shots, lands a knee, and really stuns him. He lands some left hooks, stuns Pirrello, and then finishes him. So Pirrello can get finished. Now, I know that's the only knockout loss that he has in his career, and it was over 2.5 years ago, so I wouldn't put a ton of stock into it. But you lost to that striker there, and there's questions in the grappling. Now you're taking on Ricky Simón in your UFC debut. This is a tricky one.
Yeah, so let's just go over how you hyped Pirrello. He'd get into a fight of the night style if he's matched up with, what was that?
A striker.
Wait.
It's got to be a striker. Give me the Hulk Hogan.
Oh,
it's got to be a striker.
So they're matching him up with Ricky Simón. And Ricky Simón for me is like Kelly Olynyk. You're like, wow, in college he's averaging, 23 and 12?
I like him with the Celtics. He was good.
But he wasn't, though. That's the thing. Like, he was really good, and I expected a lot of things from him. He just never really realized his full potential. And yes, Kelly Olynyk, Canadian.
Yeah.
But he's always someone who I had higher expectations for, and they just never really seem to meet them. And Ricky Simón is starting to fall into that category for me because, okay, think about before Uriah Faber, pre-Faber Ricky Simón. He beats Merab Dvalishvili, who they had a fairly competitive fight, and then, of course, there's the whole weird stoppage of, did he win by guillotine, did he not win by guillotine? But take the controversial finish out of that fight, it was still a good performance for Simón. So, okay, you can have a competitive fight with Merab, who for the most part has just run everyone over in the UFC. And then you go out and you fight Craig's low-key maybe favorite fighter of all time, Hani Yahya.
Hani, where you at?
He defends all of his takedown attempts. He beats him up on the feet. And really, Ricky Simón looked like he was ready to go on a big run at 135. And this was a time where Cody Garbrandt was still kind of in the mix. As he wasn't the champ anymore, but he was still in the division. Really, 135 is just a great division. And the fact that Ricky Simón was starting to get his name into the category of he can fight those top-level guys, it was an exciting time. And then we get a really weird UFC card with two really weird stoppages at the top of it. We get Tremaine Durandamy knocks out Aspen Ladd in about 13 seconds with one weird punch. Maybe she was out, maybe she wasn't. And Uriah Faber knocked out Ricky Simón in under a minute in the co-main event of that. And it was a fight where at first I was like, okay, anyone can lose fast. It's not that big of a deal. I'd almost rather you get knocked out in under a minute than you just get dominated for 15 of them. And then we kind of see Ricky Simón never regain the, I'll say, confidence that he had pre-Uriah Faber fight. Because you look at his loss to Rob Font. And against Rob Font, he goes out there, he tries to strike with Rob Font for a little bit. Not a great idea, as we've seen from really all of Rob Font's career. So Rob Font starts out striking him, and then he can never get his wrestling game going. And that's a big problem for Ricky Simón. He is very Frankie Edgar with his striking, where he can have success with his striking, but he needs the wrestling to be able to open up the success from his hands. He needs his opponent to always be thinking about, like, oh, damn, am I going to be defending a takedown, or am I going to be defending punches? And his last fight against Ray Borg, listen, I thought Ricky Simón was going to dominate Ray Borg. He's bigger, and they both do pretty much the same stuff. He got outstruck by Ray Borg, and it's a weird thing to just say out loud. Ray Borg was able to get on the inside constantly and just land in volume to where Ricky Simón, if you have long arms, you get to a point where, okay, you can either throw elbows when they're close or you can throw punches when they're far away. Ray Borg was able to keep it at a very awkward range for Ricky Simón, and Simón was just never able to get his striking going. Luckily, he won't have that problem in this fight. It just does concern me that if Simón can't start getting takedowns at a certain point, he's going to be exposed a little bit as a striker, but... And like you would kind of mention, it's not like Pirrello's got a great defensive grappling skill set. So Simón is able to go out there, really wear on Pirrello with his wrestling game plan. I just see him having more success as the fight progresses.
Ricky Simón, to me, if we're going to pick on Gonzaga, is like my Adam Morrison. You expected so much out of him in college. You get to Charlotte, you fall off the map. But Ricky Simón can still win a championship with the Lakers. So we'll see what happens. But it's just been a weird bag. I mean, the guy's a former champ from LFA. Comes in with a lot of hype in the UFC. Montel Jackson's the fight. And then he comes in and you talked about it. You beat Jackson. You beat Yahya. And then you lose to Faber. And where are we at now? So it's very difficult. With Gaetano Pirrello, again... I like him in a striking bout with just about anybody. I mean, the guy is explosive. But you look at the last two fighters. Percy Herrera... was not in a league whatsoever compared to Ricky Simón. And I get it. Percy Herrera's a striker. He was 6-4 going into that one. He was rail thin and just didn't look ready in that one. And then in the Enzo Maria Ezzi fight, he was 7-5. That was Pirello's last fight. He landed one liver shot, and then from that point on, the commentators went on to say, well, he doesn't even look like he wants to be in there. He looked hurt, but he wasn't accepting damage. He wasn't even accepting kicks. And then Pirrello goes in, throws a knee, and drops him, and the fight's over. Gaetano Pirrello is one of those guys that, like, he's still only 28 years old as well. Both these guys 28, but I feel like kind of the times maybe passed. I mean, unless if he puts on a statement fight in this one, holy smokes, Gaetano Pirrello, everybody in Belgium should be excited, but Italian MMA has been in a weird spot. I mean, you got Danilo Belluardo, Alessio Di Chirico, but you've got Marvin Vittori way up here. So for Gaetano Pirrello, he can really kind of capitalize on that. I know Al Zolino would like that over on Twitter. But if we have a look at the Tapology picks, it's still early, 209 of them. 94% have Ricky Simón.
Stockton.
In terms of the odds in this one, Ricky Simón went from a minus 285 at open to minus 333. Gaetano Pirrello went from a plus 225 to a plus 262. Again, I like Gaetano Pirrello as a fighter. I enjoy watching his fights. If he wins this one, I have no idea who you match him up with going forward in this division. I just don't see him. Like, the question I have to ask, is he as good as Brian Kelleher?
No.
I don't think so. I thought Brian Kelleher would have had a competitive and good fight with Ricky Simón, but I think Ricky Simón with the wrestling in this one. Again, Ray Borg, yeah, I didn't love that fight. It was closer than it should have been if you're a big Ricky Simón fan. But hopefully my Adam Morrison comparison hits, and hopefully we win a title with the Lakers here tonight.
I mean, he could have just stuck with the Miami Heat. Maybe this is the contract Ricky Simón signs, and he's going to be with the Heat until the finals, like Olynyk. I think he will get the win.
Udonis Haslem.
Yeah, but Haslam's been around for a long time. Just stop with the basketball references. Ricky Simón should win this fight. Again, his strengths really play into the weaknesses of Pirrello. And if Pirrello can defend some takedowns, start to damage Simón as the fight progresses, we might get a competitive fight. But I do see the wrestling and just the overall grappling of Ricky Simón winning out on this.
Matt, really looking forward to this fight. We have Ricky Simón getting the win over Gaetano Pirrello. And overall, a great card. Your co-main event, low-key fire. I know a lot of people are going to get excited about that the closer we get to it. Warlley Alves taking on Mounir Lazzez. And in our main event, we have Magny taking on Michael Chiesa. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, man, as we always say. Let's get into it. Listen, lately we've had a lot of fights that just get me out of bed. And this is one of those fights. We have England's Lerone Murphy, the Miracle, taking on my guy. He's the Henri Richard of MMA, Douglas D. Silva Andrade. And while he might not be like his big brother, Maurice, and I'm talking about Vitor Belfort, this pocket rocket can throw down at 145 pounds. Douglas Silva de Andrade is one of the most exciting guys that you can find in this division. Again, that happens to look like Vitor Belfort, but he has so many wins by knockout. Yes, a lot of them were on the regional scene against less than stellar competition, but to have 19 pro knockouts is amazing. And if you look at his run in the UFC, he has some wins over good competition. Bantamweight GOAT, Renan Barão, he has a win over him. Now, maybe that was the see you later Barão loss that sent him out of the UFC. And maybe Douglas just decided, hey, that was it for me. But he's back in another fight. That one was in late 2019. Also has a win over Chito Vera back in 2018. And when it's come to some of the bigger names, and if you want to play MMA math, he has a loss to Zubair Tukhugov from back in 2014. That was D. Silva's UFC debut. He has a loss to Rob Font by finish and a loss by finish to Piotr Jan. But stuff like that's going to happen. The only trouble is my guy D. Silva, 35 and a half years young, taking on Lerone Murphy, a guy that can really do just about anything in a cage. And this was a guy that was a relative unknown to a lot of MMA fans coming into his debut against Zubair Tukhugov. And if you go back and watch that fight, Lerone Murphy put on a great performance. I know there were a lot of people that fell on either side of the scoring bracket. It ended up a draw. But Lerone Murphy fought a great fight. And then a second time out, taking on Ricardo Ramos. He looked amazing, picked up a finish win there. He was a decent underdog in that one. So it's kind of weird for me. You know, you have those two fights. You get Tukhugov, which it's a tough litmus test. I mean, Tukhugov has been off for a really long time. Then you take on a really good prospect in Ricardo Ramos. So now you take on Douglas Silva de Andrade. It's kind of a weird spot seating wise, but it makes for a great fight.
It really does, and I do agree with you. Personally, for Lerone Murphy, this feels like a bit of a step back in competition for him, because where I hold Ricardo Ramos compared to D. Silva at this stage of his career, and I do think we do have to kind of look at all of this in perspective, because Andrade has good wins. You go back and you look at the Marlon Vera win, and you're like, damn, he beat Marlon Vera. That was a very green Chito Vera in his career. That was before a lot of people were on the train. I've been the conductor of that train for a long time, and I was sad when he lost that fight, I'm not going to lie. But that was a great example of what Douglas da Silva de Andrade does well. He'll get on the inside, he's got great power, and really, if you look at him from really far away, maybe with sunglasses on, at night, he looks a little bit like John Lineker when he does fight. He's got that brawling style, and he has a very physical style to fighting. I always bring up Alexander Rakic when you talk about this, how Andrade does have a certain athleticism to the way that he fights, where it's not just about the punches and the kicks. There's a certain physicality that comes along with him, and it's something that is sort of uncommon in MMA. The weird thing for Andrade, though, and I do think this is the game plan for Murphy in this fight, he's terrible fighting off of his back. On the feet, he's got power, he's got combinations. He can give you a lot of problems if you are standing and striking with him. The great news, though, is that if you can do what Petr Yan did, Yan took him down, and it wasn't like, oh, wow, Yan's got this ungodly ground game. Like, Yan's good on the ground. He's a great grappler. He's got phenomenal takedown defense. But we all know Petr Yan for being arguably the best boxer in MMA. He's just great defensively. He can download his opponent's game plan. Then he attacks. He took down Andrade, got him in crucifix, and just elbowed him a trillion times in that fight. And I do really think it matters how you lose sometimes. I always think back at Justin Gaethje when he lost Eddie Alvarez. How did he lose to Eddie Alvarez? He got hit with a bunch of body shots. He got tired, and then that opened up the knee. How did he lose to Dustin Poirier? Well, he didn't get hit with body shots. He got hit with a counter shot. Like, some fighters lose in a similar way all the time, whereas other fighters, it doesn't really matter. Just their opponent's better than them on a certain day. With Andrade, I do think that is the game plan for beating him. People have beat him other ways, but when you just see the ease in which Yan had, especially in the grappling of their fight, I think that sets up for what Murphy can do just really tremendously. Murphy's got phenomenal top pressure, really nice ground and pound. I mean, geez, we saw that in the Ramos fight. I think if he just follows a similar game plan from his last one and brings it into this fight against Andrade, he's going to have tons of success. And especially Andrade at 35 years old, he's been looking old lately. With all this time off, you just kind of have to wonder when Father Time's coming to tap old D Silva on the shoulder.
And I mean, I wish he was still a 35er, but he's up at 45 now. So that's the thing. He was, a decent size at bantamweight. Now at featherweight, you're going to be quite undersized, especially against a guy like Lerone Murphy that fights long, fights to his strengths. He can really strike from either side. His wrestling's really good. There's not a lot of holes in Lerone Murphy's game. Again, no losses. The one draw to Zubair Tukhugov. If we have a look at the Topology picks, 539 of them, 84% Murphy, 63% by knockout. If we have a look at the odds, Murphy went from a minus 225 at open to a minus 281. If we have a look at D Silva, plus 190 to a plus 225. Again, Matt, it's always, difficult. You put yourself in our position, and the same thing, the MMA JA hat on, you try and look at it for what it's worth. But I always like a D Silva fight. I always get up for Douglas Silva de Andrade's fights. But on the same token, Lerone Murphy is a lot of fun to watch. And again, you talk ceiling at this point in their career. Not that affects the fight itself, but if you're thinking, putting a matchmaker's cap on, what's a fight that I can get Lerone Murphy in to really win a lot of fans over, to really seed him well moving forward? Well, I would have thought the Ramos fight, but apparently not.
Come Swanson.
Maybe a fight against Douglas Silva de Andrade is the one. And for a lot of the reasons there, as well as the fighting acumen and the skills that Lerone Murphy possesses, I think that, again, if he's able to strike from distance early and push D Silva back against the cage, take him down, it's going to be rinse and repeat for Lerone Murphy. And he should be able to walk away with a win here. You always have to worry about the power from Douglas Silva de Andrade, though, so we'll see what happens. But I'm really looking forward to this one, going with Murphy.
So this fight reminds me a lot of when Jamal Hill fought Ovince St. Preux. You have the more developed, kind of just more mainstay of the division. Not that D Silva's as big of a name as OSP was, but it just kind of sets up the prospect to get a really impressive win. And that's what this fight feels like. Lerone Murphy should be able to win this fight no matter where it takes place. Again, the power of Andrade worries me a little bit, but as long as he can stay away from those big power shots, he should be able to get a fairly easy win, and a highlight reel one at that.
Matt, really looking forward to this fight. We both have England's Lerone Murphy to pick up the win, and overall a great card and a great main card. So keep it locked in here with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say, let's get into it. Really interesting fight at the upper echelon of women's flyweight. We talked about some of the fights earlier on this card. We were getting excited for Manon Fiorot to be taking on Leonardo on the prelims. This one at the top, and we have Roxanne Modafferi that's been around forever. Her first pro fight in 2003. Viviane Araújo, somebody that's come on the scene, and with only 4 UFC fights, a lot of people have been saying maybe she's the next one to finally fight for a title. And I know, maybe Lauren Murphy knocking on that door. There's a lot of fighters at 25.
Wait,
she was our 2020
female fighter of the year.
She
Lauren
was
Murphy?
our 2020 female fighter of the year with Fight Night picks. Go back and check out the year-end awards that we had. For Viviane Araújo, the one stumbling block so far is the loss to Jessica Ai a little over a year ago. And in that fight, it really didn't go her way. It really wasn't the typical Viviane Araújo that we were getting used to seeing. It really wasn't.
It wasn't. And Araújo is a very interesting athlete, especially at 125. And the performance that stands out in most people's mind, again, it's the one that I always go back to, is that Talito Bernardo KO. Because you don't see a lot of just one-punch KOs in women's MMA. There's Jessica Andrade, Karolina Kowalkiewicz. I guess you want to kind of include Holly Holm versus Ronda, you could, but it's just not something we get all that often. And the fact that Araújo was able to go out there and really just land like a one-hit quitter, not something you see all that often. And that started the hype train for her at 125. And of course, that fight was at 135. But when she declared that she was moving down to 125, at the time, it's not like Shevchenko had a lot of opponents. She fights Alexis Davis, really impressive win in that. But again, beating Talita Bernardo and Alexis Davis, they're not telling me that much about you as a competitor. She moves down and fights Jessica Ai, and everyone here knows how I feel about Jessica Ai, but she is a great litmus test, I think. And especially at 125, she's fought pretty much everyone at the division right now. So if you can beat her, it does set you up for those top, 5 names and then hopefully move on to a title fight. Araújo didn't look great in that. She normally has really good movement and then sets up her power using her movement. She forces people into her shots. It's not like she's going out there just one-punching people. It's more, okay, I'm going to force you to walk into my shots and then that'll accentuate my power. When she is able to land, she is able to get a lot of power behind, but Jessica Ai kind of showed that as long as you can just be frustrating with your striking, I was liking it to Cindy Dandois. Cindy Dandois' striking is awful, and there's no two ways about it, but she has really long arms, and she's always just moving her arms. That's really good defensively. If you're constantly throwing punches, it is hard for your opponent to actually stay. I know this is terrible.
Just go like a mini putt windmill. Just keep throwing them out there.
But like Cindy Dandois is just moving her arms like this, like a rock soccer robot. And unless you're just happy to stand there in the pocket and eat her shots to then land your own, you're probably not going to be able to land a lot of shots of your own. Araújo found herself in that position where it was just Jessica Ai being frustrating, moving forward, landing her, I don't want to say very crisp boxing combos, but she was just landing a lot in volume. And for Araújo, she likes to get into a rhythm herself where it's that I'm going to land and then I'll kind of reset and then I'll land and I'll reset. And she wants to keep everything at her pace. If all of those things are going according to plan, she should absolutely mop the floor with poor Roxanne Modafferi. The issue is, though, every time Roxanne is a massive underdog in a fight, she just loves to win. And you can go back to the Macy Barber fight. You can really look at the majority of Roxanne's fights throughout her career. Odds makers do her no favors, and I don't know if it's the look, I don't know if it's the age, I don't know what it is about her, but Roxanne Modafferi is tougher than a $2 steak, and she's always going to be in a fight for as long as it's going.
This fight weirds me out, because with Viviane Araújo, you look at that fight against Jessica Ai, and she didn't look like herself. So she comes out and fights Montana De La Rosa, and looks like a world beater. It was the perfect Viviane Araújo fight. Montana walks into the shots. Viviane throws with power. De La Rosa, again, a lot of people kind of likened her. Same kind of categories like a Jillian Robertson. These two women are really hype prospects. They're, 25 years old roughly in the flyweight division. They have a lot of success in their future and both very good grapplers. And Viviane Araújo looked amazing in that fight. That was only 4 months ago. Roxanne Modafferi, the last 2 fights, really weird. The Lauren Murphy fight, Roxanne looked out of place. She got outstruck. She, I know
looked good.
She blinks a lot. Murphy looked good, but Roxanne just didn't look in the fight. The whole fight, it was like the police just were on mute and we didn't get excited for it. And then she goes out, she fights Andrea Lee, gets a lot of control time in that fight, and really, I know it was it was a unanimous decision win for Modafferi. Some of the rounds were close. If you go on MMA decisions, I know, it was a rematch, and there were a couple of storylines there, but Roxanne won that fight. That's the thing. Kind of inconsistent, but she's fought really good competition.
For Roxanne Modafferi, her whole career can be summed up by the first lines that Lil Durk says in that song with Drake. I'm in the trenches, relax. Because when you look at Roxanne Modafferi's record, she's fought nothing but absolute killers since 2003. And again, people talk about how Ronda Rousey really brought women's MMA to the forefront in the 2010s, like 2011, 2012. Roxanne Modafferi was just fighting women 8 years before
Roxanne Modafferi and Jessica Aguilar. Those are the two you can thank.
Yeah, like the Jag Aguilar and Roxanne Modafferi have just been out there doing the work. Like, this is the one thing about Roxanne Modafferi. No matter what it is, win, lose, or draw, the amount of respect I have for her just for what she's been able to do for not only women's just fighting or this weight class, but really for women's athletics. Like, Roxanne Modafferi, absolute pioneer of the sport no matter what happens in this fight.
It's a tough one to pick. I mean, let's lay all the cards on the table. You look at Roxanne, you go back to the Barb Honchak fight. Was she supposed to beat Barb Honchak? Maybe, but she did. And I mean, you look at Roxanne, when the fight goes to the ground, Roxanne has a huge advantage over most fighters in this division. Say what you will about Macy Barber and her bum knee in that fight. I don't care. Roxanne won it at the end of the night. Roxanne against Barb Honchak. Let's start landing those elbows. When Roxanne gets on top, she gets an amount really easily. I don't know if it's the knee sleeves that help her out with grip on the mat. I don't know.
Stan Kelly.
I don't know if it's the t-shirt. I don't know what it is, but Roxanne is just able to do things that most people can't.
Your t-shirt have powers.
So if you look at Roxanne's record, again, 25-17, a little bit of salt. If you look at the Tapology picks, 533 of them, 67% Araujo, 86% have her to win by decision. We have a look at the odds. Araujo open to minus 225. She's now minus 331 favorite. Roxanne plus 190 to a plus 258. It's tough. All these odds are stacked against Roxanne Modafferi. Now, I gotta say this. This feels like a trap card type of fight. This feels like Araujo's supposed to win. She looked great in her last fight. Roxanne's a huge underdog. She's gonna lose. Let us know down below in the comments who you've got in this fight, because I know there's gonna be a lot of people out there with the Roxanne support. Matt, who are you taking in this one?
I'm going to take the underdog, and I think it's just, listen, Roxanne Modafferi has screwed me over not only from a prediction point of view, but from a betting point of view as well. Really throughout my whole life. Like, I have been betting money since 2003, 5 years old at the time, but if I was, I'm sure Roxanne would have been taking it all the way back then, before I'd even started elementary school. Up in 2021, though, I'm done with doubting Roxanne Modafferi. Stylistically, again, this is one of those trapdoor fights where if Araujo does start to tire at any point throughout this fight, or if Roxanne's able to get a takedown early on and really make Viviani work, I think it can be a win for Roxanne. I'll say Modafferi, the happy warrior by unanimous decision. Not my most confident pick. She could go out there and just get knocked out in 5 seconds, but I think she'll be able to just really grind out one of those classic Roxanne fights.
Viviani Araujo to win this fight has to be ultra aggressive from the jump, because Roxanne likes to do the herky-jerky movement like she's Ben Rothwell in 2008. For Viviani Araujo to win, you got to push that pace. You got to start to land power early. And it's hard to get a Talita Bernardo type knockout. But for Viviani Araujo, with the boxing and the upper body movement that she has, I think she could have a lot of success with that one. Again, feels like a trap card. Feels like one of those ones where Roxanne is going to get the win. And a lot of the money going towards Araujo and public support with Araujo. So it is a tough one to try and figure out. But I do think, again, this is one that I'd stay away from betting-wise. Again, I can't stress enough. Trap card.
Who are you picking?
And it's silly. So you either go underdog or you don't. But I will go with don't. I'm going to go Viviani Araujo in this one. I think that the boxing's going to take over. And as long as she doesn't start to fall off a cliff, if it's at the end of the first round, I'd like to see the live odds on it. But I'm going with Brazil's own Viviani Araujo, the 34-year-old to beat the 38-year-old in this upper tier of the women's flyweight division. We disagree on the picks. You got Modafferi. I have Araujo. We have a great main card coming up. A couple of really good fights after this one. You got Villanueva, Vinicius Moreira. That's not one of the ones I include. You got your co-main event, Warlley, Alves taking on Mounir Lazzez. And in our main event, a great scrap between Michael Chiesa and Neil Magny. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, man, as we always say.
Let's get into it.
Our next fight is at light heavyweight, and it's a fight that exists in the Ultimate Fighting Championship in 2021. We have Hurricane Ike Villanueva taking on Mamut Vinicius Moreira. And Matt, for Vinicius Moreira, he got a win on Contender Series way back 2.5 years ago against John Allen. No relation. Picks up a triangle choke win there. Listen, John Allen put on a decent account of himself in his last fight against Roman Dolidze, kind of.
Bad.
So Moreira beats John Allen. Then he gets knocked out by Alonzo Menefield. Then he gets knocked out by Eric Anders. Then he gets submitted by Paul Craig. Then he takes a year and 3 months off, and now he takes on Ike Villanueva. Matt, Ike Villanueva in the UFC got knocked out by Chase Sherman, got knocked out by Jordan Wright. Both of these guys have a combined 5 finish losses in the UFC, and this is a fight in the UFC in 2021 on a card that is a guy that's 3-2. I had to get that all off my chest. These are the hot take sunglasses. Normally I reserve them for Fight Night Picks Early Stoppage, our podcast. You should check that one out. But Matt, this fight's rough.
Hey, someone's always got to go. And not really in a good sense. It's not like Khabib's fighting, Kamaru Usman, and it's going to be a great fight. No, Vinicius Moreira is fighting Ike Villanueva. And we can break down the X's and O's. The issue is both guys have just had X's since they've come into the UFC. And there's not a lot of positives you can really say from either guy. Now, Vinicius Moreira, I always think of him as that guy who got knocked out by Eric Anders and then got stopped by Paul Craig. He's just really been stopped a lot in the UFC, and it's weird for Moreira. Normally you can look at a guy's body of work and you can point to, oh, well, at least in this fight he did have some sort of success, or in that fight he had levels of success. Menafield beat the brakes off him. Eric Anders did the exact same thing, and so did Paul Craig. Like, there hasn't even been a moment throughout his last 3 fights that I'm like, hey, we can really take a lot from that. And you can look through his record, but the fact that he hasn't had really even a good performance in almost 2 years is a little concerning. The fact that he's in the UFC and Yoel Romero is currently fighting in Bellator.
I mean, level competition, I can't harp on this enough. You look at Vinicius Moreira's overall record. Again, yes, 1 win by knockout, 8 wins by submission. So they call him a submission specialist. They have to hype the fight somehow. I have to hype it somehow. Submission
Hopefully
specialist.
We're doing a good job.
Ike Villanueva is a knockout artist, if you want to say that. And I mean, this is a guy that came out of Fury FC. You might be familiar with some of their fighters. I know at the same time that Villanueva was coming into the UFC, Anthony Ivy was coming into the UFC. Neither one of them have had good runs, and they both lost their 2 fights. But I remember when Villanueva was making his debut, it was the fact that he was coming off with 2 first-round finish wins over former UFC competition in Roger Narvaez and Rashad Coulter. Roger Narvaez.
The Daywalker.
And one of the worst nicknames in MMA in the Daywalker, Rashad Coulter. So it's really tricky to try and figure out. Like, even in the losses that Villanueva had on the regional scene, Robert Drysdale, MMA coach, Max Roshkoff, and
Justin
Ledette. He has lost to Ledette and a loss to Trevin Giles. So it's a tricky one to try and figure out. You can boil it down to this, I think. And this is going to be really simple because I wouldn't put a single cent of my hard-earned money on this fight. Vinicius Moreira is a submission specialist. Ike Villanueva, when he loses, and let's bring him up because he's lost 11 times. He got knocked out by Wright. Well, Dr. Stoppage cut, and it was gross. He got knocked out by Chase Sherman. Drysdale submitted him. Ledette submitted him. Drysdale is a world champion jiu-jitsu specialist and a jiu-jitsu coach. Trevin Giles submission in the 3rd round. Again, his jiu-jitsu is pretty good. His grappling's quite good. Justin Ledette at 205 or 265 pounds. Good. That fight was at 205, so a little bit of an outlier. Ike Villanueva, if he keeps it standing, I think he should be able to beat Vinicius Moreira, and that's about all I have on this one because it's a tricky fight and that's all I have.
This is one of those Kirkland kind of styles make fights.
No. This is like Dollar Tree.
Wow, fair enough. Kirkland's got some good stuff. Vinicius Moreira, loser goes home. I think we can say that.
Unfortunately, again, you never want to see anybody lose their job, but this is just...
It's like king of the court, though. Like, if you win, you get to stay, and that's how I see this fight. If Ike Villanueva can keep it on the feet, he should be able to win, because from what we've seen out of Vinicius' striking in the UFC, it has not been good. He gets backed into the cage, he concedes ground, and again, these are some of the things you don't talk about in every single fight, but it's something that you do notice with some people. He just gives up space. It's not like he's a Justin Gaethje, where you move forward, he's going to plant his feet and force you to make him move backwards. Vinicius Moreira he's more than happy just to put his back up against the cage, Tyron Woodley style. If Ike Villanueva can defend a few early takedowns, when the explosion, if you will, still is in the takedowns of Moreira, he might be able to keep this fight on the feet and really just beat him up against the cage throughout 3 rounds. I don't have the highest expectations for this fight, but I'll say Ike Villanueva.
Matt, we're both going with Ike Villanueva to get the win, and that's about all I have on this one. The rest of the predictions are incredibly positive. We're looking forward to this card. This is just low-level light heavyweights duking it out for a spot in the roster. So we'll see what happens in this one. Let us know down in the predictions because, again, normally we're a little bit more positive. And we have a great co-main event coming up between Mounir, Lazzez, and Warlley Alves. And in our main event, Neil Magny taking on Michael Chiesa. So, Matt, keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. And Matt, support for Fight Night Picks is brought to you by Manscaped. And who's the best in below the waist grooming? Matt, Manscaped offers precision engineered tools for your family jewels. Now, Matt, I'm the type of guy that shaves my nuts in the shower. And let me tell you about the Lawnmower 3.0. That light, you might think, hey, that's a little silly. No.
Game changer.
Absolute game changer. I mean, it's got a ceramic blade. And again, if you're like me, you're showering and you're shaving your nuts, it can get a little bit tricky. Now, I put this in some pretty compromising positions. Namely, it was just in Matt's lap in a box. But when I'm in the shower trying out this
There's a reason I don't touch the products, folks.
Yeah, I mean, it does work very, very good for me. And listen, when I'm not shaving my nuts and showering, I have to also point out, they make the Weed Whacker. And I've talked about this on the show before. I have profuse nose hair. It's an issue. I also have a couple of white eyebrow hairs, if you were concerned. I'm not an ear hair guy, but they make the Weed Whacker so you can shave your ears, but live and on camera for you, that's how easy it is to shave your nose hair. And listen, I bought some of these kits from the big brand department stores. A lot of these trimmers are poorly made, and a lot of them have a lot of metal components that you can't use in the shower. I've rusted out some of these types of trimmers before. They encourage you to use this in the shower. And again, the Weed Whacker is one of those products that you might think, well, yeah, I've got a nose hair trimmer, or I plucked them. But this one definitely works out quite well. So like I said, new and improved Lawnmower 3.0. It's a third generation trimmer with a ceramic blade. Waterproof technology allows you to use it in the shower. And let's not forget about the charging stand. Now, I talked about this pre-holidays, and hopefully you had a good holiday season, but now we're into 2021. And if you want to rock the bathroom, toss that bad boy on that charging stand, put it there on the sink, the vanity. It's going to be the highlight of the bathroom experience for somebody. Somebody's going to walk into your bathroom, if it's not you, if it's not your cat or dog or pet or significant other, or a freaky friend that you're bringing over on the weekends. Make sure you're wearing your mask. They're going to really enjoy this. So make sure you check it out. If you're listening right now, I want you to experience it for yourself firsthand. Get that bush and tush clean. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code FNP at manscaped.com. Make your testes your besties. Matt, if you go with the Perfect Package 3.0, you get the great box and everything that's within it. You get the Crop Reviver ball toner. It's a great spritz for your nuts. It works wonders. The one thing that I really like, and I got to pull it out here now, the Crop Preserver ball deodorant. It's like a salve. You put a little bit, slap it on down there, keep everything nice and high and tight. Like. But it does work very good, and it leaves you long-lasting freshness. There's other goodies in here. I have to point out the fact that they have a great pair of boxer briefs, Manscaped right there. I'm not upselling, but they do work very good. Those boxer briefs are very comfortable. A nice shirt will come with that Perfect Package 3.0. Your balls will thank you right on the front. And who doesn't need a nice leather toiletry case with Manscaped slapped on the front of it? All good products, all worth your time, and make sure you check them out. You're supporting them, but you're also supporting the channel and the boys with Fight Night Picks. If you're not checking out the merch on the merch stand, fightnightpicks.com. It's manscaped.com. Get 20% off and free shipping with code FNP at manscaped.com. That's 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com. Use the promo code FNP. Your balls will thank you. Really exciting fight at welterweight in our co-main event. We have Brazil's Warlley Alves taking on Tunisia's Mounir Lazzez, the sniper. And Matt, what a performance Mounir Lazzez put on in his UFC debut. This is a guy that a lot of people were excited about coming out of UAE Warriors and some of the different promotions that he's been with. I know he's fought with Brave CF as well. But the win that he had, UAE Warriors 8, was the one when I went, holy smokes, this guy's really good. And listen, Sasha Palatnikov, I know I didn't pick you to beat Kosei. I know it didn't happen. He was in everybody's comment sections.
I'm sure you're a great guy.
And the DMs, but I was excited for the Lazzez fight because of Sasha Palatnikov, from following him, being the fighter from Hong Kong, the South China Morning Post, and all these connections in my head. I got to get them out. But I was excited about that fight. So from then on, it was like, okay, Mounir Lazzez, very good striker. If you can finish Sasha Palatnikov in the first round, you're something special. Then he goes on to beat Arbor Murati back in February, and then it was only a matter of time before the UFC came calling. So he fights Abdulrazak Alhassan, and I know we both picked Abdulrazak Alhassan, and we didn't know that Abdulrazak Alhassan off that long layoff was going to look as bad as he did in the Lazzez fight.
I thought he was going to be Chaos Williams.
Chaos Williams fight, but Mounir Lazzez looked amazing. Can't take anything away from his striking was definitely on point. His chin was definitely on point in that fight as well. He's taking on a really tough test in this fight in Brazil's Warlley. Alves won the Ultimate Fighter Brazil Season 3 with a win over Marcio Alessandre Jr. And then after there, beat Alan Jouban, beat Nordine Taleb, first round guillotine over Colby Covington. And I don't care what you think about Colby Covington, the person. Colby Covington, the fighter, pretty damn good. I mean, his last fight was for the title. And as controversial as the finish was, whatever. Colby Covington's a really good fighter. Warlley Alves,
Tyron Woodley for the crown of best rapper in the UFC.
Warlley Alves finished him. Then he went on to lose to Brian Barberena and Kamaru Usman. Then he beat Salim Touhari, who, yikes, that guy had a bad run in the UFC. He beat Sultan Aliyev. He loses to James Krause. Beats Sergio Moraes, the grappler. And then he loses to Rude Boy Randy Brown. The weird thing about Warlley Alves is that the Warlley that shows up in the Covington fight, the Warlley that shows up in the Sergio Moraes fight, is usually different from the Warlley that shows up in the James Krause fight or the Randy Brown fight. He's so hot and cold, and I know you might hear it on the broadcast because they've talked about it in the past, like his willingness to compete. I know that was the story going into the Barberena fight. He just didn't have it anymore. Like, he had all this success. He was 10-0. He won the Ultimate Fighter. Like, basically peaked with a win over Covington.
Here's the thing. Not really. We're the ones who started that. Like, I think you have to give ourselves a little bit of credit for this. So he beats Covington. He has the 2 losses. And then we see a different version of Warlley Alves when he comes back. And it's a story as old as time itself. A grappler takes time off and they fall in love with their hands. And he had taken about a year off between the Usman and the Touhari fight. And you did see when he came back, he wasn't just relying on the thing that got him to the dance, to quote the great Brendan Schaub. He was now relying on his striking. And yes, in those first 2 fights back, his striking did look really good. In the Elite fight, it did as well. But then he had fallen in love with that. And the James Krause fight, I think, was a great example. Because even going into that fight, it was, okay, well, James Krause is a really good fighter. But if Warlley Alves gets into the ground, like, Warlley Alves is going to mess him up. And they never really went for the takedown attempt. He did a few times. Krause was able to defend. And for as long as Krause was able to keep the fight on the feet, he was just lighting Warlley Alves on fire. And I think that was starting to see the pattern. Or if that had not happened to him in that fight, I think we were just going to keep on seeing that. We're going to see Warlley go out there with primary strikers who at least have somewhat average takedown defense, be able to prevent the takedown, really beat him up on the feet. Now, luckily for him, James Krause should have taught him that lesson, really. Then he fights Sergio Moraes, who is in that same kind of Warlley Alves category. They're heavy-handed if they do catch you with a big shot, but their bread and butter is the ground game. And Warlley Alves went out there and he just struck with Moraes. Now, again, you can't look a lot into that because maybe he knew how good the ground game of Moraes is. Maybe he thought, okay, for as good as my grappling is, not a guy who I want to mess with. That's no big deal. They go out, they have a great fight. He wins that by knockout. But again, Sergio himself was quite old at the time in which they fought, so it's just another weird fight, and the long list of weird fights for Warlley Alves. And then he fights Randy Brown, and it was weird, and I'm not going to say we're clairvoyants here or anything, but you can kind of see him as he's walking out to the cage. Something is off with Warlley Alves. I don't know if he's distracted. I don't know what's going on. But
like the time that Shogun fought Anthony Smith, and Shogun's like, it's like somebody was cutting onions right in his face before the fight.
Yeah, Shogun looked devastated on his way to the cage, to say the least. And it was just weird. It always just seemed like Warlley Alves had something better to be doing against Randy Brown. And Randy Brown, a guy who, really good striker, really good wrestler, but not really known for his overall jiu-jitsu game. Randy Brown submitted Warlley Alves off of his back. And throughout that fight, Warlley Alves, he's like kind of talking to people who aren't there, and he's not really looking at Randy Brown. And it reminds me a lot of when Paulo Filho fought Chael Sonnen way back in the day when he had missed weight in their second fight. And he's just not overly interested in the fight itself against Chael Sonnen. That's exactly what that Randy Brown performance reminded me of. Like, it was such a case where I think I texted you at the time, and I was like, I don't think we're ever going to see Warlley Alves fight. Like, it was one of those performances where you look at him and you're like, okay, either something is seriously wrong going on with this guy, or he's just that overmatched at this stage of his career. No matter which answer we kind of got from that last performance, I don't know what he's going to do to Mounir Lazzez.
Like, in this fight, if you get grappling Warlley Alves, I'd say he probably wins this, and I don't think that's a hot take. Warlley Alves is a great grappler in MMA. He really understands it. He really puts it together, but we haven't seen that in, 5 years? Just over 5 years?
Warlley Alves is who Gilbert Burns would have been if he wasn't able to mesh all of his skills together.
Yeah, so it's really tough to tell, and if Warlley Alves wants to strike with Mounir Lazzez, it's kind of silly because it's his nickname, but he is a sniper. He's a really technical striker, and he has a lot of power. And especially in the type of spots where Warlley Alves can kind of shine in his striking, if it's in the pocket, well, Mounir Lazzez is his hands are like pistons, and I know that's an overused term as well, so I'll stop there. But he really just throws his punches out there so quick, so much accuracy, a nice low kick. Mounir Lazzez could very well piece up Warlley Alves on the feet. And if you look at the one loss, decision loss to Eldarov, I mean, that's going to happen too. You look at some of the wins, decent competition on the regional scene. But again, the win over Platnikov where you finish him early, the win over Abdulrazak Al-Hassan where you put on a great performance. And in that one fight of the night, for Warlley Alves, he won a performance of the night against Sergio Moraes, and then he had a performance of the night one against him for Randy Brown. This matchup was originally supposed to be Warlley Alves and Christian Aguilera. I think the only reason why this is a co-main event is because it's such a showcase for the UAE and Mounir Lazzez, and if Mounir Lazzez gets a win, holy smokes. This is a guy that trains out of Team Nogueira in Dubai. Again, I've seen on the UFC website where they say he's out of the UAE. I see where it said that, he's from Tunisia. So representing Team Nogueira Dubai. If Lazzez wins this, it's a huge opportunity. So if we look at the Topology picks, really interested to see them. 411 so far, early sample size, 88% Lazzez, 55% by knockout, 40% by decision. If we have a look at our handy-dandy odds here that I've written down, Alves opened at Pick'em, -115, now plus 176. Mounir Lazzez open -115, now a -215 favorite. It all depends on what Warlley Alves shows up, and that's a huge unknown, but based off the last 5 years, it's too much of an unknown for me. I'll go with Mounir Lazzez. Again, originally it was supposed to be Alves versus Christian Aguilera, a good striker, a guy that has a lot less in terms of reach than Mounir Lazzez does. He's very much a guy that hits inside the pocket. Lazzez has a ton of reach on Aguilera. And just an odd one to switch up to go from Christian Aguilera to Mounir Lazzez.
It really is. And for Mounir Lazzez, there's just so many things I like about him in this fight, especially against Alves. And again, you can say maybe the peak of Alves is higher than what you see for Lazzez in the future. If that's your opinion, I can't argue with you. But it's just this last run that Warlley Alves has been on. You never know what you're going to get. And we know that the worst version of Warlley Alves is terrible. Even though the best version of Warlley Alves might be able to beat Mounir Lazzez, the best version might be able to beat him. So it just kind of goes down from there. I like Lazzez, really no matter where this fight takes place, especially on the feet, of course. I like him from the outside. I like his power on the inside. I'll even say Lazzez inside the distance.
Matt, really looking forward to this fight. We both have Mounir Lazzez to get the win. Let us know down below in the comment section who you're going with if you're playing at home. And keep it locked in because in our main event, we have a great fight between Neil Magny and Michael Chiesa at the top of the welterweight division. So as we always say, Matt, Fight Night Picks.
Let's get into it.
We have a great fight coming up at welterweight in our main event. It's a Maverick, Michael Chiesa, taking on the Haitian sensation, Neil Magny. A couple guys that were coming into the UFC off of The Ultimate Fighter. Season 15 for Chiesa, season 16 for Neil Magny. And both these guys, Matt, have had a ton of success in their young UFC careers. If you have a look at Michael Chiesa, I mean, he won that season of The Ultimate Fighter with a win over Al Iaquinta. That's a pretty good one. You look at the record, though. Francisco Trinaldo, Canada's Mitch Clark, a finish win over Beneil Dariush, Condit, Sanchez, and Dos Anjos. Those three in his last three fights. And for Neil Magny, it was a mixed bag at the start. But if you have a look at some of the wins, Kichi Kunimoto, Alex Garcia, the forever wrestler, and lately, Johnny Hendricks, former champ, Condit, former interim champ, and obviously topping it all off with Robbie Lawler to get the win there. So for me, this fight is very much the Pete Weber of MMA fight, because this is a question of, who do you think you are? I am! And then after that, he says, damn it right. And a lot of people don't focus on that, but I think that's an underrated quote, damn it right. A lot of people say that. But if you compare these 3-fight win streaks, they're kind of low-key pretty good. I mean, Neil Magny, Li Jingliang, Rocco Martin, and Robbie Lawler. For Michael Chiesa, Carlos Condit, where you submit him. Diego Sanchez, it is what it is. I mean, he beat Michel Pereira.
He beat the brakes off Diego Sanchez.
And then the win over RDA. pretty special stuff from these two guys, and a very interesting fight, getting close to the top of this division.
So it is interesting because you look at kind of the first 2 wins in both guys' win streaks. You have Li Jingliang, who's a good fighter, but I wouldn't really say he's elite. And then Anthony Rocco Martin, another good fighter, but again, I would keep them out of the elite category. Robbie Lawler, who is a great fighter, former champion. We all love Robbie Lawler for what he has done for the sport. I gotta be honest, the Robbie Lawler who fought Neil Magny was not the same guy.
If you put Matt and I, taped us together, we might have been able to walk into that cage. We might have had the same success, maybe.
Probably not.
Probably.
Robbie Lawler, who he's got the big power, he's got the cardio and everything that we know Robbie Lawler for. Neil Magny went out there and was really just able to keep Robbie Lawler guessing throughout the fight. And I think that's going to be a really big component going into this main event against Michael Chiesa. Because you look at both guys, Neil Magny has by far the more 5-round experience out of these two. Now, Chiesa did have that one main event against Kevin Lee. We all remember that for Mario Yamasaki. Maybe he was asleep, maybe he wasn't. But that was...
talk about his mom, whatever you do. Right here,
that's true.
It's just like Beetlejuice.
Exactly. Michael Chiesa in that fight, yes, he sort of kind of maybe got submitted, but that was his first kind of introduction to the 5-round club. Whereas Neil Magny, he fought Santiago Ponzinibbio for 5 rounds. He fought Kelvin Gastelum for 5 hard rounds to a split decision. Like, he's been in those deeper waters for longer than Michael Chiesa has, and I think that's an important point to bring up when you're breaking down this fight. For Chiesa, though, you look at his 3 last wins, he's kind of one of those Kelvin Gastelum, Chael Sonnen legend-killing tours, if you will. You look at the win over Diego Sanchez, Carlos Condit, and RDA. Those are 3 much more established, well-known names in the welterweight division. And the RDA fight was very interesting. Who gives RDA issues? Dominant wrestlers. Strikers don't give him any problem because he can out-grapple most strikers. And then guys who are just good at wrestling, he can defend their takedowns, keep the fight on the feet, and beat them up. Michael Chiesa went out there and completely out-grappled RDA. And it wasn't in the way that we had seen before in the Kamaru Usman way or in the Colby Covington way where we're so much bigger than him, we can overpower him. Michael Chiesa beat him because of, sound footwork and good grappling. It wasn't the things that really stand out when you're looking at a fight and looking at how impressive a guy looked in the performance. But to do what he was able to do against RDA just shows you what level of grappling Michael Chiesa is at. You don't need us to tell you how good of a grappler Michael Chiesa is. This is a guy with submission wins over Jim Miller. He submitted Benil Dariush, one of the better grapplers in the UFC. Chiesa on the mat is a problem for anybody. And yes, people are going to bring up, he got submitted by Anthony Pettis or Kevin Lee submitted him. Kevin Lee, again, controversy in that one. And in the Anthony Pettis fight, he got rocked and then he got submitted. It's not like he just got straight up submitted by Anthony Pettis. And I do think those are really big distinctions we have to make. And this fight, last point for me, this fight comes down to wrestling defense. And I think this comes down for both guys. If Neil Magny can take down Michael Chiesa, and I know you're probably thinking, well, why would he do that? Neil Magny has really good top position and he's got really good ground and pound as well. Now, I'm not recommending Neil Magny goes for takedowns in this fight because on the ground is definitely where Chiesa is going to have the most success. But if they're having 50-50 striking exchanges, and if he just wants to change it up for the sake of the fight, he could go for some offensive takedowns. And it wouldn't be the end of the world for Chiesa if that happens, but it's just a great position for Magny. On the flip side, if Chiesa is able to take down Magny and get on top of him, that's a position we've seen Neil Magny really struggle with throughout his UFC career. RDA kicked his leg, got on top, and just through really heavy top pressure, was able to then get into mount and then, of course, get the arm triangle choke. We've seen it before where Neil Magny from top position is a problem. Neil Magny off of his back, though, a much more manageable guy, especially if you're Chiesa looking for submissions.
I mean, perfect example in a striker's paradise type of fight. Hector Lombard. Hector Lombard on top. Neil Magny on top of Hector Lombard. Now, the big difference is the power bar of Hector Lombard. And with Chiesa's, it's a little bit more reserved, I guess I should say. Or he understands how to manage it a lot better than Hector Lombard, BKFC's own. But in a fight like this, it is really interesting, and I think it bears the fact that we have a look at the percentages. Michael Chiesa's takedown accuracy, 51%. That's really good, especially for a grappler. I mean, guys with 50% plus takedown accuracy with that many fights, we're talking like the Umar Akhmedovs of the world, where that's a great stat to have. 68% takedown defense for Magny, 44%, and 58% for defense, 44, of course, for the accuracy. Those are pretty good percentages
for both guys.
Those are really good percentages for both those guys. Chiesa averages about 1.3 more takedowns per 15 minutes than Magny does. 3.84 for Chiesa, 2.55 for Magny. So both guys very active with their ground games. Neil Magny, especially in that fight against Robbie Lawler, it was like, well, Robbie Lawler's a good wrestler. We're not really going to have to worry about this. Neil Magny...
Did not matter.
Neil Magny looked like top dog in that fight. Like, he fought the fight of his life in that Robbie Lawler fight. And yes, I get it. Robbie Lawler's on a huge, steep decline. But still, Neil Magny, you can't take it away from him. He did look really good in that fight. Originally paired up to fight Jeff Neal in that one.
That would not have been a good fight for Neil Magny. I'm just going to say that right now. Michael Chiesa, if you ever play 2K, there's these things called glitched cards where they make like Shaquille O'Neal really good at shooting 3-pointers. Michael Chiesa straight up just had a glitched fight. When he fought Jorge Masvidal, that fight makes no sense. And you go back and you just look at how it ended. Jorge Masvidal wins by Darce choke. And you're like, well, Darce choke, that's a pretty cool submission to hit. Michael Chiesa drops Jorge Masvidal in that fight, and then Jorge Masvidal submits Michael Chiesa by Darce choke. Nothing that I just said makes any sense at all when we're talking about MMA, because Chiesa does not have great power by any means. He's more of a volume guy. His stand-up has gotten quite a bit better, but definitely known for his ground game. And the fact that a primary boxer was able to get him in a Darce choke, just a very bizarro fight for Chiesa.
One of the weird things about this fight, too, with Michael Chiesa, and I talk about this all the time, I always compare him to Michael Johnson. You see Michael Chiesa in the corner, so many different fighters, same thing with Michael Johnson with the guys at Sanford MMA, is the fact that he corners a lot of people. I honestly did not know what to put for his home gym on the graphic that you're going to see floating around next to us, because he's been a sick jitsu type of guy. He's trained in the Pacific Northwest. A couple of sites have him as strictly the UFC PI. But throughout the pandemic, he's been doing a lot of commentary. He's been doing a lot of booth work. I know, we've known about this fight for a while. A lot of these fights coming in around short notice, what have you. I don't know what kind of work Michael Chiesa has been doing over the last calendar year, because it's been almost a year between his fight against Dos Anjos and his fight against Magny. Neil Magny in 2020 fought Li Jingliang back early in the year. In June, he fought Rocco Martin, and in August, he fought Robbie Lawler. And he's been very active, training at Elevation in Colorado. So just a couple of things to watch out for as we preview this fight. In terms of the predictions so far, over on Tapology, 544 total predictions out there by the fans. 56% going with Magny. 81% predicting a decision win from him. For Chiesa, 44% picking him, 54% saying decision, and then about 40% saying he's going to win by submission. If we have a look at my paper notes and the odds, Neil Magny opened a -150 favorite. He's now -136 over on Best Fight Odds. Michael Chiesa opened +130. He's now at a +111. So the money's coming in on Chiesa. The votes are in on Neil Magny. This is a tricky fight to try and pick.
It really is, and I only see it going one of two ways. Either Michael Chiesa wins by submission or Neil Magny wins by decision. I don't think Michael Chiesa can keep up with the pace of Neil Magny for 5 rounds. And that's nothing against Michael Chiesa. I just don't really know any UFC fighter who can keep up with the consistent pace of Neil Magny. Now, yes, of course, like Usman could out-wrestle him and make him tired. But for the most part, Neil Magny has as good of cardio as you can find in the UFC. And that's throw in Max Holloway, throw in anyone like that. Like, that's the type of cardio Neil Magny has. And he's very good at weaponizing his pace. It's a term that I heard for the first time when Chael Sonnen talked about it, and then Chael Sonnen talks about how GSP was the first person he'd ever seen do it. Now, GSP and Magny use it in very different ways, but you can kind of see what he's getting at, and just really by the term. Neil Magny is like the ocean. He just kind of chips away at you, and he'll erode away at you over and over and over again. And
You got it right.
What?
Oh, if anybody remembers from one of the last prediction videos back in December, Matt had erosion way off and didn't get it, but good job.
So for Chiesa, if he can avoid just the grinding style of Magny and keep the fight on the feet, and this is the weird thing, if I'm Michael Chiesa, I defend every single takedown for the first 3 rounds. I only let Neil Magny take me down in the later rounds of the fight when I can no longer get the takedown myself. And I think that's an important point to make, because if you're Chiesa going for takedowns on Magny, you're just going to get tired yourself. And if you can keep the fight on the feet, make Neil Magny work. Don't just get taken down because you know that your strength is in the jiu-jitsu. If you can force Neil Magny to work as well, you might be able to bring down some of the output that he has himself in those later rounds. And Neil Magny, I'll liken him a little bit to a Jack Hermanson. Now, I understand his main event didn't really go his way, but he has a similar style of striking where he's just doing a lot no matter what. And for Chiesa, that might give him trouble. He's in the same boat himself. It's not like, we're not going to see a one-punch knockout in this fight, one of the few things I can guarantee. But if Neil Magny is able to get Chiesa up against the cage, he's going to be able to land in combination with very high levels of volume. Whereas Chiesa, if he gets Magny up against the cage, I don't see him, A, either having the wrestling to get Magny down from that position, or B, I don't see him being able to land to the body and to the head and really start putting combinations together to hurt Magny later on in the fight. I like Neil Magny. I like him by decision. But I do see there being about a 2, maybe 3 round window where Chiesa can get a submission.
And for me, the Neil Magny fights are his last 2 fights that really proved a lot of questions or doubts that I had. And if you look at it, the fight against Rocco Martin, What's Rocco Martin good at? Well, at 55, he was a good wrestler. At 70, he's been a really good wrestler. He goes up against Neil Magny. He tries to push a pace, and he's not able to do it. He's not really able to take Neil Magny down, not really able to keep him down, not really able to wear on him either. And in a 3-round fight in a small cage, Neil Magny looked amazing. In the fight against Robbie Lawler, Neil Magny's offensive wrestling looked great. Michael Chiesa, again, I think he's a great wrestler. If he submits Neil Magny, feather in his cap, a big win for him, especially in a main event like this. That's a great showcase ahead of a Conor McGregor fight. It's in a Conor McGregor window of a week, and listen, you can disagree with me there, but the guy's the biggest star in the sport. So that's a huge win for either of these guys. But again, I like Neil Magny. The one thing that he's never really been able to do all that well, and it's not to a Stefan Struve extent, is his distance management isn't there with a Struve. You see some people push a pace, push them up against the cage. Or really, if they're a real power striker, they're able to kind of push against them. But, like erosion in the tide, he's able to kind of push back. And again, it's the ebbs and flows of Neil Magny understands his gas tank so very well that he's able to withstand a lot of power and pressure early. Then he's able to apply it later on in a fight. And for a lot of those reasons, I also have Neil Magny.
So I do agree. The only thing I will say is Magny on the offensive is good at using his range. He won't just rush in when he does think he has an opponent hurt. Now again, it's not like Neil Magny has a lot of instances where he cracks a guy with a right hand, they get stumbled, and he's just rushing in for the flurry kill. But he is a very disciplined fighter. And we see a lot of fighters, it's a very simple word, and you probably think, well, every fighter's disciplined. There's levels to this game, and Neil Magny is on the higher level of, okay, I'm a very cerebral fighter. And again, everything positive I can say about Neil Magny, there's a bit of a runoff to Michael Chiesa. These two are very similar, not only inside the cage, but outside as well. I do like Neil Magny, but again, can't stress this enough. There's a window where Chiesa can strangle Neil Magny unconscious. I just think after the second round, the overall cardio of Magny is going to be too much of an advantage.
Matt, we're both going with the Haitian sensation Neil Magny to pick up a win. We have an insane week planned ahead.
We're back.
So maybe you're watching this ahead of time. Maybe you're watching it, before the card between Holloway and Cater. That question mark kicks is at 10 a.m. Eastern here on YouTube. I've been putting those out there early. This card on Wednesday morning on the East Coast of North America. We're going to have question mark kicks on the Tuesday night. And for Saturday's card, UFC 257, question mark kicks will be at a normal time before that pay-per-view event. Make sure you're paying for it. Watch out for Uncle Dana. They're not paying me to say that, but he's out there. He's lurking. He's looking in the underground whisper networks of the place, trying to figure out who's
on the
bad.
bloody elbow for him.
But really looking forward to this fight. Again, we both have Magny to get the win. Enjoy fight week. Let us know down below who you're picking in maybe even this fight or the rest of the fight card. It's going to be a lot of fun, so keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, as we always say.
Let's get into it.